Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. The late afternoon sun cast long, languid shadows across the manicured lawns of Prestwick Manor, as the carriage carrying Monsieur Hercule Poirot drew to a stately halt before its ornate, wrought-iron gates. A pall of expectancy hung over the sprawling estate, an air of polite excitement tinged with unspoken apprehension. Rumour had it that Lady Beatrice Castleberry, the imperious doyenne of London society, was to host the season's most exclusive salon, an evening of rare musical performances, glittering conversation, and, most intriguingly, the private unveiling of a curious artifact. Poirot stepped down from the carriage with an elegance befitting his impeccable reputation. His grey hound's tooth jacket fitted him like a second skin. His waxed moustaches curled in perfect symmetry above a pinpoint nose that quivered with anticipation. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings's faithful chronicler and occasional comic foil adjusted the brim of his bowler hat and cleared his throat. "I can scarcely imagine what this artifact might be, mon ami. Lady Castleberry has a predilection for the dramatic. Exactement, Hastings," Poirot replied, his pale blue eyes alight. "But drama and murder are not always so far apart." He offered a conspiratorial smile, stepping forward across the gravel drive toward the grand entrance, where a small group of elegantly dressed guests had already begun to gather. The stage was set at night. Secrets would be revealed, and somewhere amid the glittering guests, a crime awaited its moment to shatter the evening's veneer of refinement. Chapter 2. The First. Clues. The wide marble foyer of Prestwick Manor thrummed with murmured anticipation as the assembled guests drifted through the doorway into a vast reception room. Gilded panelling gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and silk tapestries whispered tales of generations past. At the far end of the room stood a slender pedestal draped in velvet, upon which the promised artifact was to be unveiled. But now the pedestal stood empty. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Lady Beatrice Castleberry, radiant in white satin and diamonds, moved forward with the grace of a swan until she halted abruptly, pale shock flickering across her features. "Mon Dieu," she breathed, her gloved hands lifting to her lips. "It is gone." A hush fell. In that pregnant silence, Poirot's little grey cells began their inexorable stirring. He bent slightly toward Hastings. "Observe, Hastings. The pedestal shows no sign of disturbance. No indentation in the velvet. No mark on the marble floor." He tapped a gloved finger lightly against the raised dais. "And yet our mysterious treasure has vanished." Hastings frowned, glancing at the surrounding onlookers. A theft, here, during Lady Castleberry's own soirée. He shook his head. "It seems impossible." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Nothing is impossible, mon ami, when one considers the ingenuity of the human heart." He straightened, addressing the room in a voice measured yet carrying. "Ladies and gentlemen, I beg your indulgence. Before we proceed with the evening's entertainment, I must ask that no one leave this chamber." His gaze swept the group, alighting on each face in turn. Lady Castleberry recovered her composure with astonishing speed. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, whatever you require." She turned to her butler, who hurried forward. "Summon Inspector Pratt," she commanded, "and see that the doors are watched." The butler inclined and retreated. Footsteps echoed as he sought the nearest servant. Meanwhile, a stir of whispers rose among the guests. Some murmured about scandal, others cast furtive glances at their neighbours. Poirot watched them all with hawk-like intensity. He stepped toward the empty stand. "Hastings, look here." He pointed to a distinctive smudge on the velvet clothosmere of deep indigo that had no business being present. The invitation to this evening bore exactly the same mark. Have you noticed, Hastings, that certain names were hastily obscured in ink? Hastings blinked. The smudged invitation. I thought it merely a printing flaw. He held up the cream card issued at entry, the elegant script blotted by a dark blue smear obscuring one of the attending names. It covered Lady Helena Fitzroy's name, did it not? Precisely. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Lady Fitzroy was among the first to arrive. He turned again to the guests. In fact, let us examine the invitations more closely, with a small nod to a passing footman. Poirot produced a fresh card from his coat pocket, his own invitation, immaculate and unblemished. One identical in every respect, save for this blemish. He tapped the smudge. It is fresh ink, Hastings too. Fluid to be part of the original design. Someone among us knew that Lady Fitzroy would be present and wished to disguise her attendance. A low murmur rose as the room slowly recognized the implication. Lady Fitzroy, mysterious figure whose past included whispered scandals and ruined fortune, stood pale at the back, her dark eyes wide with alarm. Poirot inclined his head. Forgive my curiosity, Lady Fitzroy, but might I inquire when you first saw this invitation? She swallowed. This afternoon, at the train station. I do not recall any smudge then. It was only when I handed it to the footman at the door that I noticed it. Her voice trembled. Thank you. Poirot turned to Hastings. We have motive number 1, to conceal a particular person's presence, and motive number 2, a great deal more substantial, the disappearance of the artifact itself. He swept his gaze across the room. Now, let us consider how one might remove the object without leaving trace. Hastings knelt beside the pedestal, inspecting the marble. Floor, no footprints, he observed. No scratch, no chip in the marble. He frowned at the velvet hem, nor any tear, hardly the act of a clumsy thief. Poirot crouched, his fingertips brushing the velvet. Note the direction of the fibers. They lie undisturbed toward the rear, but are slightly raised at the front. The artifact was removed by lifting the cloth backward, not forward. He rose, addressing Lady Castleberry's butler, who had returned with Inspector Pratt. Inspector, I trust you have stationed officers at every exit. Pratt, a stout man with a neatly trimmed moustache of his own, nodded crisply. 2 constables at each door, Monsieur Tersbeen. Poirot turned to the guests. Until we locate the missing piece, I must ask each of you to remain here. We shall conduct a preliminary search, and then perhaps a careful interview. Lady Castleberry glanced nervously toward the double doors leading to the drawing-room. Do you truly believe the culprit is among us? Poirot's eyes fixed on her. Madame, if the artifact vanished before the arrival of outsiders, then surely the thief is within these walls. A chorus of anxious breathings answered him. Hastings straightened. Very well, Poirot, where shall we begin? The detective tapped a slender cane against the marble floor. First, the spot where the object stood. He gestured toward the velvet-draped pedestal. Second, the pocketbooks, gloves, and mufflers of each guest. Third, the cloakroom. He indicated a side door, and every servant's passage between it and this hall. As constables advanced to seal off the cloakroom entrance, Poirot instructed the footman to collect every glove and kerchief laid aside by the guests. Hastings assisted Lady Fitzroy, who, she admitted reluctantly, had discarded her dainty embroidered gloves upon entry. Poirot examined them under the glow of crystal lamps. "Ah," he murmured, pointing to a small speck of metallic dust adhered to the fabric grafters, dust used to treat metal surfaces. The stolen piece, I recall, was a small antique locket of gilt silver. He held the glove aloft. Our thief wore gloves, treated with this very powdery detail invisible to the eye, yet irrefutable under closer inspection. Lady Fitzroy shivered. "But I have worn these gloves all afternoon. I have never handled any metal work." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Indeed, and yet here is the proof. Someone among you chose those gloves, knowing the artifact would slip from its perch at this hour, expecting the velvet fibers to mask the movement." A hush fell once more as Poirot replaced the glove upon a tray held by a footman. He straightened, addressing the gathering. "My friends, we have discovered A. A smudged invitation intended to conceal one arrival. B. No sign of forced entry or disturbance. C. Gloves bearing metallic residue. D. An object lifted backward from its display. Before any further departure, I must ask these gloves to remain in my custody, and I shall continue questioning you, all beginning, perhaps, with those whose attendance was most unexpected." The guests murmured among themselves, eyes shifting in suspicion as Inspector Pratt gave a curt nod. Poirot turned to Hastings with a wry smile. "And so, Hastings, the game truly begins. The first clues are gathered, but the true meaning lies buried beneath layers of human intention. Let us now uncover the motives that drove one of these people to commit an unthinkable act in broad daylight." Hastings nodded, steadying himself for the interrogation to come. The great detective's mind was already piecing together the puzzle, and the next moves in this intricate dance of deceit would soon follow. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects, with the velvet pedestal still bare and the humid hush of anxiety settling over the grand hall. Inspector Pratt summoned the guests forward. In small groups, Poirot stood at the center, cane in hand, surveying each newcomer with those keen, measuring eyes. Hastings, by his side, quietly jotted notes in his notebook, heart thumping with anticipation, first for the puzzle unfolding, and then sympathy for the nerves of Lady Beatrice's circle, now trapped in a gilded cage of suspicion. The first group approached, Lady Helena Fitzroy, muffled beneath a sabre-lined cape, and Lord Reginald Fairfax, his silk gloves crisp and his expression sombre. Lady Fitzroy's eyes were red-rimmed with distress. Fairfax kept his jaw clenched, inclined his head politely. "Lady Fitzroy, Lord Fairfax, I thank you for your patience. Let us begin with you, my lady. You admitted the invitation bore a smudge, preventing your name from appearing clearly. Were there any other irregularities that caught your attention?" Lady Fitzroy swallowed. "Only that I felt eyes upon me at the station," she whispered. "A gentleman unknown to me pressed my invitation ever so slightly before offering his own, as though comparing the two." She looked at Fairfax. "I thought at the time it was mere coincidence." He raised an eyebrow. "I was seated across from her on the train, Madame," he said crisply, "and I did indeed comment that our stations of departure were the same. But I had neither opportunity nor interest to tamper with her invitation." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Ah, but motive need not arise from opportunity alone. Forgive my bluntness. Did you know of Lady Fitzroy's involvement in the upcoming charity performance? Or did you have any reason to wish her presence concealed?" Fairfax hesitated an instant long enough for Hastings to note the flicker of tension in his eyes before replying. "No, I confess ignorance of Lady Fitzroy's personal affairs. I merely attended as a social courtesy. He glanced at the room, then back at Poirot. I trust such courtesy would be reciprocated. Poirot inclined his head once more. Tursbeen, thank you both. He motioned them aside as the next party advanced. A trio entered. Dr. Beatrice Langford, niece of the hostess and a rising physician. Mr. Charles Pendleton, a stockbroker with nervous fingers, and Miss Veronica Ames, an heiress with a steady, watchful gaze. They formed a discreet semicircle before the detective. Dr. Langford, Poirot began, eyes fixed on the young doctor's angular face. You were privy to the object's arrival. He indicated a small, corded box, now laid aside on a side. Table. Dr. Langford nodded. Indeed, Poirot, I accompanied the delivery from London. The box was locked. Only Lady Castleberry and her butler hold the keys. The object inside was wrapped carefully in velvet cloth. She paused. I must confess unease at the choice of velvet far too readily shifts under pressure, I thought. Mr. Pendleton cleared his throat. I also noticed during transport that Dr. Langford herself examined the cloth intentless, so much so that I observed a faint crease where someone might have lifted the cover. He shifted uneasily. Miss Ames's eyes narrowed. I would hardly accuse the doctor without cause. If anyone tampered, it was likely someone more experienced with garments. She cast a glance at her own embroidered gloves. Dr. Langford's cheeks coloured. I inspected only to ensure the artifact was unharmed. No reason to suspect foul play at that moment. She turned to Poirot. The velvet showed no sign of another hand only, the natural folds created during shipment. Poirot listened, nodding slowly. Thank you, and you, Mr. Pendleton, your concern. Pendleton swallowed. Madame, the velvet displayed a faint dab of what appeared to be a coca-like stain. I mentioned it to Lady Castleberry, but thought little of it until now. Cocoa, Poirot's moustaches quivered. Curio, indeed. He made a note. And you, Miss Ames, have you any observations? Miss Ames lifted her chin. Only that the guests seemed unconcerned until the announcement of the theft. Before that, most lingered near the musician's alcove, waiting for my cousin's performance. I myself was admiring the silver gilt frame of the invitation display. Poirot paused. You admired silver and gold, but the artifact itself was gilt silver. He tapped his cane thoughtfully. Thank you all. The powder on these gloves matches metallic residues. Yet that cocoa stain suggests a second agent, something to disguise or perhaps lure suspicion. He signalled the footman, who presented a small tray holding various gloves recovered earlier. Poirot removed a pair with a fine chocolate-brown smudge along the fingertips. Miss Ames, these you had discarded. She paled. I may have worn gloves while sampling Lady Beatrice's chocolate eclairs in the drawing-room. She stammered. They were offered to all guests. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, then the stain is explained. But the metallic dust remains unaccounted for. He replaced the gloves carefully. Let us proceed. A final quartet joined the small circle. Lady Beatrice's cousin, Colonel Archibald Wentworth, his military bearing unmistakable, Mrs. Agatha Montague, a widow famed for her philanthropic zeal, Mr. Samuel Tripp, Lady Castleberry's solicitor, and Miss Lydia Hawthorne, a young governess recently arrived in society. Colonel Wentworth stepped forward. Inspector Pratt, I offer my full cooperation. I was perusing the estate's art collection when I learned of the disappearance. My quarters overlooked the West Wing. I saw no comings or goings. Mrs. Montague murmured agreement. I, too, was. In that wing visiting Lady Castleberry's art school students, I heard only the soft strains of Miss Linton's harp before the announcement. Mr. Tripp adjusted his spectacles. I maintain the registry of invitations. I can confirm that no duplicate invitations existed beyond those issued. Any smudge was not mine. Miss Hawthorne bit her lip. I have greeted every guest as they arrived, Madame, she said. If any guest asked for assistance, I offered my arm. I do not recall any request to conceal attendance. Poirot nodded. Excellent. Each testimony narrows our field. Yet we still lack the means by which the artifact vanished so cleanly, and the precise motive behind the initial smudge. We must delve deeper. He turned to the assembled 8 suspects. Ladies and gentlemen, you are all essential to my inquiries. Some of you have genuine innocence, others perhaps more to hide. But know this: every answer leads closer to the one true culprit. Inspector Pratt stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, shall we commence individual questioning? Poirot's gaze swept the company. Patience, Inspector. First, I desire a moment alone with Lady Castleberry. He gestured toward the salon doors. Hastings, will you accompany me? I wish to examine her personal papers and to learn what she knows of this artifact's provenance. Hastings inclined. At once, as the detective and his companion slipped through the distant double doors, the gathered guests exchanged uneasy glances. The hum of quiet conversation resumed, punctuated by the soft drip of crystal pendants in the chandelier above. Hastings lingered at Poirot's side. What think you, mon ami? Our circle is large, but already threads of motive appear. Poirot tapped his temple. Indeed, Hastings, the cocoa stain, the metallic dust, the smudged invitation, each is a thread. We must find the point where they converge. In the meantime, I shall speak with Lady Castleberry to discover who, among her inner circle, might have reason both to conceal and to steal. He drew a deep breath, smoothing his jacket. Come, Hastings, the next clues await. Behind these doors, as they disappeared, the suspects watched from the hall, tension taut as wire. Behind the rightful hosts for secrets whispered in shadow, and one of those secrets would soon unravel the delicate dance of deception at Prestwick Manor. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives in the inner sanctum. Monsieur Hercule Poirot paused at the threshold of Lady Beatrice Castleberry's private salon, inhaling the faint perfume of rosewood and lavender that lingered in the air. His keen ears caught the soft murmur of voices beyond the heavy draperies, Lady Castleberry's measured tones, offset by Captain Hastings's occasional rumble of agreement. Poirot tapped twice with his cane, a discreet signal that he was ready, then swept past the silken folds, Hastings at his elbow. Inside, the salon was a study in refined elegance. Velvet settees upholstered in berry hues, inlaid walnut tables, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A harp stood in one corner, its strings silent now, the polished frame lit by afternoon beams filtering through stained-glass windows. At a small writing desk beside the hearth sat Lady Castleberry herself, composed though with a tremor of tension. In her posture, "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, inclining her head gravely. "You are too kind to assist me in this distressing affair." Madame Poirot responded with gentle formality. "You have suffered a great shock. I only wish to help you restore order to this house of secrets." He gestured to Hastings. "Captain Hastings, would you be so good as to secure these papers?" Hastings stepped forward, gathering the scattered sheets of correspondence, provenance certificates, and inventory lists that lay across the desk. He arranged them into neat piles, documents relating to the artifact's acquisition, letters from the London curator who authenticated it, and Lady Castleberry's own handwritten notes. Poirot's eyes flicked over the documents. This artifact, a late Georgian locket of gilt silver, correct? Lady Castleberry nodded. A family heirloom rescued from my grandfather's collection. It was recently authenticated by Lord Ashcombe's museum and entrusted to me for exhibition tonight. Poirot sifted through a certificate embossed with a museum seal. Here, he pointed, the curator notes that the locket bears a microscopic inscription on its inner rim. Have you or your butler the key to that box? Yes, Lady Castleberry replied, producing a small brass key from a ribbon around her neck. It is never far from me. She set it on the desk, eyes shadowed with worry. I confided only in my butler, Monsieur Dupont. He fetched the object from London early this morning. Poirot inclined his head. You mentioned earlier that the box was locked and only you and your butler possessed the key. Yet the thief evidently knew when and where to remove the artifact without disturbing the velvet. That requires knowledge of the setup, n'est-ce pas? Lady Castleberry clasped her hands. My salon is off limits to all but myself, Monsieur Poirot. The only visitors this afternoon were you, Captain Hastings, and the servants making final preparations. Hastings added, and I saw no one enter or leave this room until you summoned us, Poirot. Precisely. Poirot turned to the hearth, where a pair of embroidered gloves lay folded over the arm of a settee. He picked them up, examining the fingertips. These belong to you, madame, she flushed. Yes, I removed them upon arrival this afternoon. He held them beneath his eyeglass. Note the absence of metallic dust here. Yet earlier, in the grand hall, I observed traces on one guest's gloves. That guest did not come through this room. The locket must have passed through another handsome one with direct access to the hall, but not necessarily to your private quarters. Lady Castleberry drew a slow breath. Only Monsieur Dupont and I hold the key to the box, but any servant could have carried the velvet cloth. She nodded toward a small side door. The service corridor runs behind here, linking the cloakroom to the main hall. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Indeed, and the butler would have walked that corridor twice, once to bring the box here, and once to return with the empty case. Did you notice anything unusual about his manner? Lady Castleberry hesitated. Monsieur Dupont has served my family for 20 years. He is impeccable. Yet I sensed a tremor in his voice when he spoke of the artifact's arrival. I dismissed it as relief that the exhibit was complete. Poirot closed his eyes, picturing the butler's upright posture and clipped accent. Hastings, fetch me the registry log for the servants' movements. Hastings hurried to a gilt-framed ledger on the desk and cracked it open to the entries for the day. Together they studied the neat columns of times, names, and locations. Dupont, Poirot read aloud, collected package from London at 10:15 a.m., delivered to the salon at 10:45 a.m., returned to kitchen corridor at 11 a.m., next recorded at 5:30 p.m. in the main hall immediately after the theft was discovered. Lady Castleberry nodded. That is correct. She swallowed. He reported back to me that all was in order. Poirot tapped on the page, and between 11 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. there is no entry. Yet the locket was placed on the pedestal at precisely 5 p.m. to be unveiled at 6 o'clock. That leaves a window of 5 hours in which the box sat unattended here, and Dupont's whereabouts are uncertain. Hastings frowned. But the corridor is narrow and under surveillance by the housekeeper's maid. She passes hourly to check on supplies, and whom we have not yet questioned, Poirot added. Lady Castleberry bit her lip. Very well, anyone may have entered this room if they had a spare moment. Poirot placed the ledger on the desk. Next, I wish to examine the locket's case itself. He fetched the empty box from its perch on a side table. The lid was closed. He clicked the key in the lock, turning it with a measured twist. Inside, the velvet cushion lay pristine save for a single wrinkle. He pressed the finger of his gloved hand against that faint crease. The locket was removed by lifting the cloth toward the hinge, then pivoting the lid closed, leaving the crease at the hinge end. He straightened, eyes narrowing. Our thief expected to return the locket to its original box, key and all, before inspection, implying not just a theft, but a temporary concealment, almost as if someone wished to study the object privately. Hastings blinked. But why? To examine the inscription. Perhaps Poirot tilted the box, or to remove the inscription so that authentication fails later. A cunning plan. He turned back to Lady Castleberry. Madame, did you display the invitation lists anywhere near the box? She gazed toward the hearth. On the mantelpiece a gilded frame with the evening's program and guest list. Excellent. Poirot strode over and examined the framed card. Note this program was printed in the same ink as the invitations. If someone swapped programs during the afternoon, a smudge could transfer from one to another. Lady Castleberry's eyes widened. You mean the same ink that smudged Lady Fitzroy's invitation? Exactly. Poirot tapped the glass. We have evidence of ink and of velvet movement, tin to locations. The pattern suggests the thief visited the mantelpiece and the pedestal in quick succession. He glanced at Hastings. Time to question Monsieur Dupintin, the housekeeper's maid. Lady Castleberry rose. Very well. Dupont is in the kitchen corridor. I shall summon him. She lifted a silver bell. A footman appeared at the door, ready to obey. Poirot placed a hand on Hastings's arm. Hastings, see that Lady Fitzroy remains calm. I believe her involvement was harmless. We must maintain discretion. Hastings inclined. Understood, Poirot. The footman departed to fetch Dupont, and the housekeeper's maid, a young woman in a prim uniform, appeared hesitantly at the door. Poirot nodded. Mademoiselle, thank you for joining us. We require your precise schedule today. Every pass along that corridor. She clasped her hands. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I checked the linen stocks at 10:30, 12:30, 2:30, and 4:30. I did not pass through again until after the announcement at 5:20. Poirot noted her punctuality. So you did not see anyone else enter or leave through this corridor? No, sir. He inclined in thanks. T.R.S. Bean. She withdrew, leaving the detective alone with Lady Castleberry and Hastings. Moments later, the butler entered Monsieur Dupont's dark eyes, betraying a flicker of unease. Poirot greeted him with unwavering calm. Monsieur Dupont, you have served Madame faithfully for many years. I know you to be trustworthy. Dupont bowed. I am at your service, monsieur. I wish to know, when you brought the box here, did you lock it yourself? I did, monsieur. I took the key from Madame's neck, opened the box, and placed the locket within. Then I locked the lid and returned the key to her. He paused. Never have I left it unattended without ensuring its safety. Poirot's fingertips brushed the box's interior. Yet the paper log does not account for your movements between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. He fixed Dupont with a steady look. Where were you during that period? Dupont's composure wavered. He glanced at Lady Castleberry, who gave a subtle nod. He exhaled. I accompanied Lady Helena Fitzroy's carriage back to the stables. She requested assistance with her muffler, which had become tangled in the door. I returned immediately. Hastings frowned. Impossible, Lady Fitzroy said. She entered the front door at 5 p.m. Dupont's lips trembled. She had trouble with the invitation card. I went to help her straighten her smudge. He broke off, hand pressed to his heart. Mon Dieu, I never thought. Poirot raised a finger. Then you were not in this room during the afternoon? He shook his head. No, monsieur. Poirot's quiet gaze encompassed the three of them. Very well, you have given your account. Now I must consider each statement and align them with the physical evidence. He tapped the cushion crease. The smudged program, the velvet fold, the metallic residue edge. Clue points to one among us, who not only stole, but studied the locket. Soon we shall reveal who among these servants and guests believes that knowledge grants them power greater than gold. Lady Castleberry bit her lip as Poirot turned away, and Hastings closed the ledger. The detective's gaze, distant and probing, promised that the next steps in this intricate investigation would bring the hidden motives to light, even if the truth lay buried within a labyrinth of polished lies. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Inspector Pratt stood just inside the Grand Hall's threshold as Poirot called for order. Madame, Etty, Messieurs, Poirot's voice rang clear. We shall now proceed to brief interviews. I kindly ask each of you to answer my questions candidly and with the utmost precision. He gave a slight bow before turning to Lord Reginald. Fairfax, whose composed facade barely concealed a flicker of unease. Lord Fairfax stepped forward, smoothing his cufflinks. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Lord Fairfax, you were present at the train station when Lady Fitzroy first observed her smudged invitation. Tell me, did you notice anyone loitering nearby who might have taken advantage of the commotion? Fairfax hesitated, fingers flexing at his sides. There was an elderly gentleman with a cane, sir. He lingered by the cloakroom entrance, glancing back at arriving ladies as if ensuring no one watched him. He cleared his throat, but when I approached to offer assistance, he took his leave toward the stables and vanished. Poirot considered this. And this gentleman, did you note his appearance? Clothing, gait? He wore a tweed jacket, rather dusty, and spoke with a rural accent. I thought nothing of it until now. Fairfax's gaze flicked awkwardly to Lady Fitzroy, as if fearing her disapproval. Poirot nodded. Thank you. I shall inquire among the staff about any visitor of that description. He gestured to Lord Fairfax's gloves. May I inspect these, my lord? Fairfax extended them reluctantly. Poirot turned them over under the chandelier's light, noting a faint smudge of indigo at the fingertips. He carefully replaced them. On the tray. Next, Poirot invited Lady Helena Fitzroy forward. She approached with tremulous grace, smoothing the hem of her sable-lined cape. Poirot inclined. Lady Fitzroy, you mentioned a stranger compared your invitation to yours at the station. Do you recall his words? Her breath caught. He said he admired the elegance of both cards and wondered if one bore any distinction to mark a special guest. I presumed him a curious admirer of fine printing. She paused, glancing at the empty pedestal. I did not suspect malice. Poirot tapped his cane, and yet his actions smudging the ink suggest foul intent. Did you observe where he left afterward? Lady Fitzroy closed her eyes briefly. He turned down the service corridor toward the West Wing stables, but I thought him simply lost. Poirot's lips curved. "'Ter's been courage, madame." He then beckoned Dr. Beatrice Langford. The young physician advanced her composure, restored now that she was under Poirot's magnanimous gaze. "Dr. Langford," Poirot began, "you accompanied the locket from London. You noted the velvet wrapping during transit. Did you handle the inner box at any point today beyond placing it on the pedestal?" Dr. Langford's brow furrowed. "I only removed the outer shipping crate to reveal the velvet box. I did not lift the cloth itself. My concern was the box's integrity." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Yet you mentioned a crease forming in the velvet. That crease now marks where the thief lifted the cloth backward." He indicated the diagram Hastings had sketched of the pedestal's fibers. "Can you think how another might have entered unobserved?" She bit her lip. "The service corridor runs just behind this hall. A swift-footed person could slip in between deliveries of refreshments." Her gaze flicked to the servants' entrance, but I saw no one. "Mercy." He placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "Your cooperation is invaluable." Mr. Charles Pendleton was next. He approached with nervous energy, adjusting his tie repeatedly. "Mr. Pendleton," Poirot said, "you reported a coca-like stain on the velvet wrapping. You attributed it to consumption of eclairs earlier." Pendleton swallowed. "Yes, monsieur. I sampled them in the drawing room. The chef's chocolate is quite exquisite." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet, a deliberate cocoa stain could mask a metallic residue for a time misdirection." He paused, observing Pendleton's fingers tremble. "Did you notice anyone else sampling sweets with unusual zeal?" Pendleton hesitated. "Miss Ames lingered longest by the dessert table, testing almost every offering." He swallowed. "But she has a known fondness for confections." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, thank you." Miss Veronica Ames advanced calmly, her steady gaze. "Unflinching Miss Ames, you admitted tasting multiple desserts, yet your gloves bear no cocoa residue now. How do you explain that?" She inclined her head, lips pursed. "I changed gloves after sampling. My own were dampened, and I replaced them with a fresh pair fetched by the butler." Poirot's moustaches twitched. A prudent measure. But the butler's gloves, if fetched from the cloakroom, might have carried metallic dust from earlier handling. He let the observation hang. "Thank you." With 5 suspects interviewed, Poirot motioned to the 4 remaining guests, grouped near the marble hearth. Colonel Archibald Wentworth stepped forward with measured dignity. "Colonel Wentworth, you inspected the art collection prior to the unveiling. Did you touch any metal frames or fixtures?" The colonel's posture stiffened, only to steady myself as I admired a portrait. "But that was in the East Wing gallery, not here." He squared his shoulders. "By 5 p.m. I was in Lady Beatrice's presence." Poirot nodded. "And you observed no one enter through the side corridor?" "None." He shook his head emphatically. Mrs. Agatha Montague, next in line, curtsied slightly. "Madame Montague, you were among the first to learn of the theft. Did you notice any suspicious conversation or behavior in the moments before?" Her kindly face tightened. "I heard low voices near the mantel between Mr. Tripp and Miss Hawthorne, though I could not discern their words. They appeared engaged in earnest discussion." She paused. "But perhaps it was only speculation about the music program." Poirot tapped his cane knowingly. "Speculation that may have concealed collusion." He smiled gently. "Thank you, madame." Mr. Samuel Tripp, the solicitor, adjusted his spectacles as he approached. "Mr. Tripp, you maintained the registry of invitations. You confirmed no duplicates existed, yet one program in this frame was smudged at the same spot as Lady Fitzroy's invitation. How might that have occurred?" Tripp cleared his throat. "Only by handling. Perhaps someone transferred the program from the mantelpiece to the invitation board." He swallowed, "But I cannot imagine why." Poirot nodded. "Anonymity of attendance can be a powerful motive." He studied Tripp's face for any sign of discomfort. Finding none, he replaced the papers. Finally, Miss Lydia Hawthorne, the governess, stepped forward. "Miss Hawthorne, you greeted each guest at arrival. Did anyone linger to speak with you in confidence?" She hesitated. A gentleman tall with dusty trousers paused to inquire about the ladies' cloakroom. He seemed concerned that a storm might rise and one might need to reclaim one's shawl promptly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Dusty trousers. That recalls Lord Fairfax's description of an elderly man with a cane near the cloakroom. He allowed the realization to sink in before continuing. "Thank you." One by one, the guests returned to their places, expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. Hastings scribbled rapidly, then looked up. "Poirot, we have an elderly stranger at the station, a rural accent, dusty trousers, and could he be connected to the stable corridor?" Few guests ventured there. Poirot tapped his temple. "Precisely, Hastings. Our unknown stranger may be the key. But recall, someone among these very people acquired metallic dust, replaced gloves, and used cocoa as a red herring. The interviews reveal contradictions." He paused, eyes sweeping the group. "Now, we shall cross-examine these threads. But first, I must consult with Inspector Pratt on securing that stable corridor and questioning any staff who might have encountered our elusive visitor." Hastings inclined. "Shall we then?" "Let us proceed," Poirot agreed, stepping toward the double doors once more. "For in each answer given, one truth lies hidden, waiting to be unearthed." As they departed the hall to pursue fresh inquiries, the remaining guests exchanged uneasy glances, conscious that each of them bore some fragment of the puzzle. That one, in particular, was already turning further clues inside their mind. Chapter 6. First false lead Inspector Pratt led Poirot and Captain Hastings down the narrow service corridor toward the stables, the late afternoon light dimming behind them. The hush of the grand hall gave way to the steady clip-clop of hooves and the earthy scent of hay. A single lantern swung from a wrought-iron bracket, illuminating a row of stalls and a wooden bench strewn with bridles and riding crops. "Here," Pratt announced, pausing before the third stall. "This is where our elderly stranger was said to have lingered." The stable hand reported seeing faint footprints in the sawdust leading toward the tack room. Poirot knelt to inspect the floor. Beneath the dust lay a distinct pattern of iron-toed boot treads larger than any guest's shoes. "These prints are fresh," he observed, tracing a finger along the edge. "But note they end abruptly at the threshold, as though the wearer removed boots." He pointed to a neat row of overshoe clogs beside the stall door. Hastings bent to examine the clogs, overshoes that matched the prints, likely supplied by someone wishing to avoid leaving standard shoe marks. He looked up. Could our stranger have borrowed these from the staff? Pratt frowned. Only the head groom and his assistant would have keys to this rack. Both have been accounted for attending to the horses since morning. Nevertheless, Poirot murmured, rising, "We must inspect their quarters." He signalled over his shoulder. Hastings, retrieve those gloves from the butler's tray. Hastings hurried back to the hall to fetch the small silver dish holding suspect gloves, then returned. Poirot held the tray beneath the lantern's glow. Observe, Inspector, the overshoe soles bear traces not only of sawdust but also of metallic dust, similar to that found on our guest's gloves. He turned toward the open tack room, a small chamber lined with tools for saddle and bit maintenance. Metal polishing cloths hung from hooks, and a half-used tin of polishing paste lay open. On a shelf, the inspector's brow furrowed. Could the stable hand's polishing work account for this residue? Possibly, Poirot agreed. He knelt again, examining the tin. This paste contains fine, abrasive particles, but our earlier residue was not copper-based polishit. Matched gilt silver. He tapped the tin's rim. This is not proof, merely a coincidence. Footsteps echoed behind them as the head groom, Mr. Oliver Grimes, emerged from the tack room, his apron dusted with sawdust and small metal shavings. He straightened upon seeing the lantern. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Captain, what can I do for you? Poirot rose and inclined his head. Monsieur Grimes, we require your assistance. Tell me, did anyone other than you and your assistant enter this tack room this afternoon? Grimes nodded. No, monsieur. Only my assistant, young Turner, came by to fetch fresh brushes at midday. He left soon after. He looked anxious. I admit, I polished Lady Beatrice's new stirrups. Earlier she requested them for demonstration. I used a separate cloth. Thank you. Poirot studied Grimes's lined face. And the overshoes who has access to them? The head groom and I, Grimes replied. We provide them to guests riding in the yard during wet weather. Poirot glanced at Hastings. Let us speak with Mr. Turner. The trio proceeded further down the corridor to a small office where Turner, pale and nervous, stood polishing a leather harness. Turner looked up, hands trembling. Monsieur Poirot, he stammered. I heard there was trouble. He set the harness aside. I came to see if I could assist. Thank you, Turner, Poirot said kindly. Tell me, did you lend anyone overshoes or gloves today? I gave a pair of clogs to a gentleman with a cane. He arrived at the service door just before the theft was announced. He seemed urgent. Turner swallowed. He didn't return the clogs. Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot. So our stranger borrowed clogs and escaped unseen. Exactly, Poirot murmured. He turned to Turner. You say he wore a cane? Turner nodded, wiping his forehead. Yes, monsieur. And he had a cloth over his mouth, as if to avoid recognition. He limped slightly. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Understood. And you noticed no other peculiar behavior? Turner shook his head, except that the stable door to the yard was left ajar for a moment, but I closed it immediately. Poirot thanked him, then motioned to Hastings and Pratt. This, my friends, appears a promising lead, the succession of overshoes, metallic dust, and the stranger's footprints. Yet I sense a false trail. Pratt frowned. But the clogs connect. To the prints and the polished tin explains the residue. We Poirot agreed, but recall, the clean-up in the upper hall revealed no polish residue on the pedestal, or the box only on gloves, worn by Mrs. Montague's nephew, Mr. Pendleton. He tapped his temple. Our stranger may have borrowed clogs to appear local, drawing attention away from someone already present, someone wearing gloves treated with metallic dust earlier. Hastings frowned. So the stranger is a decoy, while the real thief remains inside the hall. Precisely. Poirot gestured toward the tack room, and the true culprit counted on these service corridors to mask a temporary absence. Turner's tale is true, but irrelevant to the core crime. Pratt ran a hand through his hair. Then the stable-hand's account and the borrowed clogs lead us nowhere. Not nowhere, but astray, Poirot said gently. We shall remind Turner that any visitor with the marked invitation could have exploited that momentary oversight. He turned to the groom. Monsieur Grimes, ensure that all tack-room visitors are logged henceforth, then that the yard door remains closed. Grimes inclined. Immediately, monsieur. Poirot and his companions retraced their steps toward the grand hall. As they climbed the short staircase back to the reception room, Hastings exhaled. A false lead indeed, but instructive. It shows the murderer anticipated our movements, sand-planted clues to distract us. Exactament, Hastings, Poirot replied. Misdirection is the murderer's art. Now, we must return to the hall and confront those suspects, anew particularly Mr. Pendleton, whose gloves bore the metallic dust, and Lady Fitzroy's invitation smudge, which remains unexplained. They re-entered the reception room, where the guests observed their return in silent curiosity. Poirot paused before the assembled group. Mesdames et messieurs, he announced, thank you for your continued patience. We have pursued a lead. That, while clever, does not point to our culprit. It appears someone sought to implicate an outsider, drawing suspicion away from the true mastermind. Mr. Pendleton's brow furrowed. He straightened. Inspector Pratt, I assure you, I had no knowledge of any clogs or stranger. My focus was solely on the dessert table. Poirot inclined his head. I believe you, Mr. Pendleton. Yet your gloves carry the metallic dust dew. You recall handling any metalwork today. Pendleton's lips trembled. Only a moment's inspection of my pocket watch after dinner. I adjusted it before placing it in my coat. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A watch indeed contains brass, and steel metallic dust may adhere to gloves handling such mechanism. He addressed the company. Our suspect is one who has access to metal pocket watches, fine jewelry, and who wore gloves to conceal both the dust and their identity. Lady Fitzroy exhaled. Then we returned to those whose hands touched the locket inside its box. Poirot's small smile was triumphant. Just so, let us resume our interviews with fresh clarity and watch carefully who diverts our gaze. He tapped his cane. For, in the next phase of questioning, the murderer's true intentions and true identity will soon reveal themselves. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the net tightening. Behind each polished facade lurked a secret, and only the slow pull of Poirot's deduction would draw it into the light. Chapter 7. The psychological game. Once back in the grand hall, Poirot motioned for the guests to assemble around the vacant pedestal. The chandelier's crystal prisms scattered light across anxious faces as the detective stepped forward, cane in hand, his gaze sweeping the circle of suspects. Mesdames et messieurs, he began softly, we have walked several corridors, followed footprints, and sifted through cluesette. The truth remains elusive. Now I propose a different approach, a game of minds. He paused, allowing the words to settle like a tangible mist. I shall pose a few questions, each designed to provoke an instinctive response. Watch closely how you answer and how you hesitate. He first addressed Mr. Charles Pendleton, the nervous stockbroker. Monsieur Pendleton, if you believed the locket's disappearance a trivial matter, would you volunteer to retrieve it yourself? Pendleton's face paled. He swallowed audibly. I suppose I would inform the authorities, monsieur.
Dodia.
Is not my place to take matters into my own hands. Poirot nodded, sharpening the knife of scrutiny. And if the authorities failed you, and your own fortune was at stake, would that change your course? A flicker of conflict crossed Pendleton's features. He glanced at his gloved hands, now folded before him. I hope I would trust justice above personal gain. Poirot turned, almost imperceptibly, toward Miss Veronica Ames. Miss Ames, you sampled Lady Beatrice's confections earlier. If stirred by guilt, would you confess without compulsion? Her posture remained unruffled, yet her eyes betrayed a glint of challenge. Monsieur, I see no reason for guilt. I tasted sweets nothing. More, she drew a steady breath. But if I were responsible, I would have the courage to admit it. A murmur rippled among the guests. Poirot allowed it to pass before he continued. Courage is admirably at some times. Fear of discovery can outweigh honesty. He shifted his gaze to Dr. Beatrice Langford. Dr. Langford, you oversee the care of life and death. If confronted with a moral crisis, do you follow protocol or conscience? Dr. Langford's fingers twined at her sides. Protocol protects society, yes, but conscience guides the heart. If I believed protocol wrong, I would act upon conscience. Poirot's moustaches quivered. An interesting dilemma, n'est-ce? Pa, he moved to Miss Lydia Hawthorne, the governess. Miss Hawthorne responsible for the welfare of children. Tell me, if silence protected those you love, would you maintain it at the cost of truth? The governess's eyes darkened. She swallowed before replying. Silence can be both shield and prison. I would speak only if silence harmed the innocent. Poirot inclined, then addressed Mrs. Agatha Montague. Madame, philanthropy seeks to ease suffering. If charity masked a secret transgression, would you expose it? Mrs. Montague's kindly. Facade flickered. Her voice wavered. Charity must be pure. If I discovered a secret that harmed others, I would reveal it, though reluctantly. A tense hush followed as Poirot turned back to the center of the hall. Notice how each of you responds when personal stakes are dramatized. Yet our true suspect fears neither clogs nor strangers, but exposure. He paused, eyes glinting. And so we progress to a subtle test. He produced a sealed envelope from his coat pocket. Inside this envelope is a single scrap of paper, fragment from the program itself, smudged in identical ink to Lady Fitzroy's invitation. He held it aloft. One of you handled this program earlier today in private. I ask you now, if the program were placed before you accidentally, would you conceal its contents or display it for all to read? He approached Colonel Archibald Wentworth, offering him the envelope. The colonel's steady bearing wavered as he took the envelope, his gloved fingers closing round it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Open it, Colonel, and read the line you find most striking. Wentworth paused, then gingerly broke the seal. He withdrew the note a single line. A name unseen is a danger unchallenged. His jaw tightened. He read aloud, voice clipped, danger unchallenged. He looked around, eyes lingering on each guest. I find that rather dramatic. Poirot inclined. Indeed. A cryptic warning, but intended to unsettle. Colonel, did you find this program fragment among your own papers at any time today? The colonel's face flushed. He stammered, I cannot recall handling any loose program. He glanced at his cuffs. Perhaps the butler delivered. Something to me. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, But the butler denies distributing programs. Is that correct, madame? He turned to Lady Castleberry, who nodded gravely. A single program was framed by the hearth, she said. None were distributed thereafter. A murmur of speculation spread. Poirot gently reclaimed the envelope. Thank you, Colonel. Now, Miss Hawthorne, would you test a program if placed in your parcel by mistake? Miss Hawthorne bit her lip. I would return it to its proper place. Poirot nodded. A courteous act, yet one that also conceals evidence. He replaced the fragment in his pocket. Observe, Mies Amos. In questioning motives, we unearth truths beyond words. Yet one more demonstration remains. He turned to Mr. Samuel Tripp. The solicitor, Mr. Tripp, as keeper of records, you value order. If invited to sign a document without reading its final clause, would you proceed? Tripp adjusted his spectacles, discomfort flickering in his eyes. I am astrayed every clause. To sign blindly is... Thank you, Turner, Poirot said kindly. Tell me, did you lend anyone overshoes or gloves today? I gave a pair of clogs to a gentleman with a cane. He arrived at the service door just before the theft was announced. He seemed urgent. Turner swallowed. He didn't return the clogs. Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot. So our stranger borrowed clogs and escaped unseen. Exactly, Poirot murmured. He turned to Turner. You say he wore a cane? Turner nodded, wiping his forehead. Yes, monsieur. And he had a cloth over his mouth, as if to avoid recognition. He limped slightly. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Understood. And you noticed no other peculiar behavior? Turner shook his head, except that the stable door to the yard was left ajar for a moment, but I closed it immediately. Poirot thanked him, then motioned to Hastings and Pratt. This, my friends, appears a promising lead, the succession of overshoes, metallic dust, and the stranger's footprints. Yet I sense a false trail. Pratt frowned. But the clogs connect. To the prints and the polished tin explains the residue. We Poirot agreed, but recall, the clean-up in the upper hall revealed no polish residue on the pedestal, or the box only on gloves, worn by Mrs. Montague's nephew, Mr. Pendleton. He tapped his temple. Our stranger may have borrowed clogs to appear local, drawing attention away from someone already present, someone wearing gloves treated with metallic dust earlier. Hastings frowned. So the stranger is a decoy, while the real thief remains inside the hall. Precisely, Poirot gestured toward the tack room, and the true culprit counted on these service corridors to mask a temporary absence. Turner's tale is true, but irrelevant to the core crime. Pratt ran a hand through his hair. Then the stable-hand's account and the borrowed clogs lead us nowhere. Not nowhere, but astray, Poirot said gently. We shall remind Turner that any visitor with the marked invitation could have exploited that momentary oversight. He turned to the groom. Monsieur Grimes, ensure that all tack-room visitors are logged henceforth, then that the yard door remains closed. Grimes inclined. Immediately, monsieur. Poirot and his companions retraced their steps toward the grand hall. As they climbed the short staircase back to the reception room, Hastings exhaled. A false lead indeed, but instructive. It shows the murderer anticipated our movements, sand-planted clues to distract us. Exactament, Hastings, Poirot replied. Misdirection is the murderer's art. Now, we must return to the hall and confront those suspects, anew particularly. Mr. Pendleton, whose gloves bore the metallic dust, and Lady Fitzroy's invitation smudge, which remains unexplained. They re-entered the reception room, where the guests observed their return in silent curiosity. Poirot paused before the assembled group. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "thank you for your continued patience. We have pursued a lead. That, while clever, does not point to our culprit. It appears someone sought to implicate an outsider, drawing suspicion away from the true mastermind." Mr. Pendleton's brow furrowed. He straightened. "Inspector Pratt, I assure you, I had no knowledge of any clogs or stranger. My focus was solely on the dessert table." Poirot inclined his head. "I believe you, Mr. Pendleton. Yet your gloves carry the metallic dust dew. You recall handling any metalwork today?" Pendleton's lips trembled. "Only a moment's inspection of my pocket watch after dinner. I adjusted it before placing it in my coat." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A watch indeed contains brass, and steel metallic dust may adhere to gloves handling such mechanism. He addressed the company. "Our suspect is one who has access to metal pocket watches, fine jewelry, and who wore gloves to conceal both the dust and their identity." Lady Fitzroy exhaled. "Then we return to those whose hands touched the locket inside its box." Poirot's small smile was triumphant. "Just so, let us resume our interviews with fresh clarity and watch carefully who diverts our gaze." He tapped his cane. "For, in the next phase of questioning, the murderer's true intentions and true identity will soon reveal themselves." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the net tightening. Behind each polished facade lurked a secret, and only the slow pull of Poirot's deduction would draw it into the light. Chapter 7. The psychological game. Once back in the grand hall, Poirot motioned for the guests to assemble around the vacant pedestal. The chandelier's crystal prisms scattered light across anxious faces as the detective stepped forward, cane in hand, his gaze sweeping the circle of suspects. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "we have walked several corridors, followed footprints, and sifted through cluzette. The truth remains elusive. Now I propose a different approach, a game of minds." He paused, allowing the words to settle like a tangible mist. "I shall pose a few questions, each designed to provoke an instinctive response. Watch closely how you answer and how you hesitate." He first addressed Mr. Charles Pendleton, the nervous stockbroker. "Monsieur Pendleton, if you believed the locket's disappearance a trivial matter, would you volunteer to retrieve it yourself?" Pendleton's face paled. He swallowed audibly. I suppose I would inform the authorities, monsieur. Dodia. Is not my place to take matters into my own hands." Poirot nodded, sharpening the knife of scrutiny. "And if the authorities failed you, and your own fortune was at stake, would that change your course?" A flicker of conflict crossed Pendleton's features. He glanced at his gloved hands, now folded before him. I hope I would trust justice above personal gain." Poirot turned, almost imperceptibly, toward Miss Veronica Ames. "Miss Ames, you sampled Lady Beatrice's confections earlier. If stirred by guilt, would you confess without compulsion?" Her posture remained unruffled, yet her eyes betrayed a glint of challenge. "Monsieur, I see no reason for guilt. I tasted sweets nothing. More," she drew a steady breath. "But if I were responsible, I would have the courage to admit it." A murmur rippled among the guests. Poirot allowed it to pass before he continued. "Courage is admirably at some times. Fear of discovery can outweigh honesty." He shifted his gaze to Dr. Beatrice Langford. "Dr. Langford, You oversee the care of life and death. If confronted with a moral crisis, do you follow protocol or conscience? Dr. Langford's fingers twined at her sides. Protocol protects society, yes, but conscience guides the heart. If I believed protocol wrong, I would act upon conscience. Poirot's moustaches quivered. An interesting dilemma, n'est-ce? Pa, he moved to Miss Lydia Hawthorne, the governess. Miss Hawthorne responsible for the welfare of children. Tell me, if silence protected those you love, would you maintain it at the cost of truth? The governess's eyes darkened. She swallowed before replying, silence can be both shield and prison. I would speak only if silence harmed the innocent. Poirot inclined, then addressed Mrs. Agatha Montague. Madame, philanthropy seeks to ease suffering. If charity masked a secret transgression, would you expose it? Mrs. Montague's kindly facade flickered. Her voice wavered. Charity must be pure. If I discovered a secret that harmed others, I would reveal it, though reluctantly. A tense hush followed as Poirot turned back to the center of the hall. Notice how each of you responds when personal stakes are dramatized. Yet our true suspect fears neither clogs nor strangers, but exposure. He paused, eyes glinting. And so, we progress to a subtle test. He produced a sealed envelope from his coat pocket. Inside this envelope is a single scrap of paper, fragment from the program itself, smudged in identical ink to Lady Fitzroy's invitation. He held it aloft. One of you handled this program earlier today in private. I ask you now, if the program were placed before you accidentally, would you conceal its contents or display it for all to read? He approached Colonel Archibald Wentworth, offering him the envelope. The colonel's steady bearing wavered as he took the envelope, his gloved fingers closing round it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Open it, Colonel, and read the line you find most striking. Wentworth paused, then gingerly broke the seal. He withdrew the note a single line. A name unseen is a danger unchallenged. His jaw tightened. He read aloud, voice clipped, danger unchallenged. He looked around, eyes lingering on each guest. I find that rather dramatic. Poirot inclined. Indeed. A cryptic warning, but intended to unsettle. Colonel, did you find this program fragment among your own papers at any time today? The colonel's face flushed. He stammered, I cannot recall handling any loose program. He glanced at his cuffs. Perhaps the butler delivered. Something to me. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, but the butler denies distributing programs. Is that correct, madame? He turned to Lady Castleberry, who nodded gravely. A single program was framed by the hearth, she said. None were distributed thereafter. A murmur of speculation spread. Poirot gently reclaimed the envelope. Thank you, Colonel. Now, Miss Hawthorne, would you test a program if placed in your parcel by mistake? Miss Hawthorne bit her lip. I would return it to its proper place. Poirot nodded. A courteous act, yet one that also conceals evidence. He replaced the fragment in his pocket. Observe, Mies Amos. In questioning motives, we unearth truths beyond words. Yet one more demonstration remains. He turned to Mr. Samuel Tripp. The solicitor, Mr. Tripp, as keeper of records, you value order. If invited to sign a document without reading its final clause, would you proceed? Tripp adjusted his spectacles, discomfort flickering in his eyes. I am astrayed every clause. To sign blindly is negligence. Poirot smiled thinly. An admirable principle, yet negligence in other forms may be at fault here. He addressed the room. I have tested your reactions, your willingness to deceive when stakes grow personal. One of you showed the slightest tremor when the program fragment appeared, another the faintest flicker of guilt at a hypothetical confession. These tell us who among you fears discovery most. He paused, letting the revelation hang. Then, in a softer tone, we shall continue these inquiries more privately, but know that the psychological game has revealed much. The threads of deception are fraying, and the murderer will soon reveal himself when faced with the right prod. He tapped his cane lightly against the marble floor. Captain Hastings, Inspector Pratt, let us withdraw for a brief consultation. Guests, please remain here. Your next turn at confession approaches swiftly. As Poirot, Hastings, and Pratt stepped through the double doors, the hall filled with a charged silence. The guests exchanged uncertain glances, each pondering how they had fared under Poirot's probing questions, and which unguarded moment might betray their deepest secret. The psychological game was set, and the players now realized that one misstep would unleash the full force of Poirot's deduction. Chapter 8. A. Secondary Mystery. The hush that followed Poirot's departure lingered in the grand hall like a held breath. The assembled guests shifted uneasily, each wondering which of them would next feel the weight of the detective's scrutiny. Moments later, a muffled thud echoed from the adjacent drawing room, followed by a startled cry. Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Pratt re-entered at a brisk pace, only to find Lady Beatrice Castlebury slumped in a high-backed chair, her gloved hands limp in her lap. A silver tea tray lay overturned at her feet, cups shattered on the marble floor, and the delicate scent of bergamot hung acrid in the air. "Mon Dieu!" exclaimed Hastings, rushing forward. He knelt beside Lady Castlebury, gently turning her face toward the pale shaft of light. Her cheeks were unnaturally flushed, her breathing shallow. "She's fainted or worse." Inspector Pratt barked an order to the footman. "Fetch my medical kit, hurry." The footman sprinted away. Poirot crouched beside Lady Castlebury, his little grey cells spinning at 100 turns per second. "Notice," Poirot murmured to Hastings, "the teacup she held is cracked, but the tea within is undrunk. See how the cup trembled in her hand, spilling its contents when she collapsed." Hastings peered at the shattered porcelain. Yes, but she only took one sip. Why would she collapse before drinking? Poirot's gaze flickered to the tea leaves strewn across the tray. Exactly, a slip of the cup or a jolted hand. But note the precise smudge upon the rim identical to that on the invitation and program. He tapped at the cup's lip. Someone deliberately handled this teacup and likely administered something unseen. Pratt returned with the medical kit, and the doctor among the party. Dr. Langford took command, checking Lady Castlebury's pulse and pupils. After tense moments, she declared, "She is alive, but I suspect an irritant, perhaps a mild toxin, to provoke collapse without lasting harm." Miss Ames clutched her pearls, poisoned, at a social gathering. Poirot rose, addressing the group. "Indeed, another crime has occurred, an attempt to incapacitate our hostess. This suggests a second motive, to divert attention from the missing locket, or to eliminate a witness." Hastings helped Lady Castlebury into a sofa, while Dr. Langford administered a restorative cordial. Once stabilized, Lady Castlebury's voice trembled as she spoke. "I merely raised the cup to my lips. I felt dizzy and then nothing." Poirot inclined. "Who poured the tea, madame?" The hostess shook her head. "My butler prepared refreshments in the drawing room. He left moments before the collapse." Poirot's moustaches quivered. Let us examine the tea set. He swept aside broken shards and pointed to a silver teapot on a side table. Only this teapot remains. It bears no smudge. But see here, he tapped an ornate sugar basin. The tongs have a faint trace of the same ink. The sugar was handled with a smudged finger. Dr. Langford knelt to inspect the tongs, then frowned. The sugar itself shows no discoloration. Whatever was introduced must have been in the water or tea leaves. Pratt snapped his heels together. Then the butler, Monsieur Dupont. Answer more questions. Poirot turned to Lady Fitzroy. Madame, you observed the butler in the drawing-room. Lady Fitzroy nodded. He set the cups, poured the tea, then left the tray unattended for a moment while he assisted Miss Ames. With her gloves, Miss Ames stepped forward. I asked for fresh gloves, and Monsieur Dupont fetched them from the cloakroom. He returned the gloves, then left with the tray. Hastings frowned. A narrow window in which someone could tamper with the tea. Poirot swept his gaze across the guests. And this window corresponds to the moment the locket was lifted from its case approximately 5 minutes ago. He paused. It appears our thief has become bold, seeking not only to steal, but to sow further confusion. Pratt wheeled on the butler as he re-entered. Monsieur Dupont, where were you between assisting Miss Ames and Lady Castleberry's collapse? Dupont's composure cracked. He swallowed. I returned to the pantry to fetch fresh napkins. I did not handle the tea again. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Yet the tongs bear your smudged fingerprint, and the teacup rim shows the same ink. Pray, monsieur, did you not notice any smudge on your gloves before serving? Dupont faltered. I did not look. Poirot tapped the cane. Forgive me, but Lady Fitzroy's invitation, the programme, and now the teapot tongs all bear smudges of identical ink. Someone among us has used this ink as a calling card. He turned to the assembled. Note also that the collapse occurred when our hostess held the cup with her right hand just as the butler handed it to her. Hastings interjected, but a fainting spell could also be natural, a misstep in the draught of this hall. Poirot inclined. True, but the deliberate mark upon each clue suggests orchestrated misdirection. We now have 2 crimes, the theft of the locket and the attempt on Lady Castleberry's life. Lady Fitzroy's eyes narrowed, and both crimes rely on proximity to the tea and the artifact display. Poirot's pale eyes gleamed. Exactly. Our culprit is one who moves freely between the drawing-room and the grand hall, one whose gloves carry metallic dust and whose finger bears ink that smudges invitations and tea tongs alike. He turned back to Dupont. Monsieur, your gloves were free of metallic residue earlier, yet you handled the silver teapot would that not have left traces. Dupont's shoulders slumped. I wore a fresh pair for the tea service. His voice quivered. I did not wish to soil my black gloves before serving. A stunned silence followed. Hastings leaned forward. So you changed gloves, but did you retrieve them from the cloakroom? Dupont swallowed. Yes, Monsieur Poirot nodded. And someone could have replaced those fresh gloves with another pair earlier treated with metallic dust. Inspector. Pratt's eyes widened. Another false lead. Our butler is innocent, merely a convenient scapegoat. Poirot's lips curved. Indeed. The true perpetrator anticipated every move. The smudged invitations, the velvet crease, the borrowed clogs, and now the poisoned tea. Each misdirection was laid to frame another. He addressed the guests with grave calm. I assure you, Mes Amis, the time has come to confront the motive behind these layered crimes. The locket's inscription must be the key once revealed. It will expose the culprit's identity and their ultimate aim. As Lady Castlebury was escorted to her chambers, Poirot turned to Hastings and Pratt. "Let us retire briefly, Mies Amos. We have a secondary mystery to solve, but it serves only to distract. Soon we unmask the conspiracy at its heart." Hastings nodded, though his mind raced. The web of deception had grown more tangled, but Poirot's unwavering confidence foretold that the final threads would be unraveled and the true culprit revealed. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The drawing room where Lady Beatrice Castlebury had fainted lay quiet now, its aftermath carefully attended by Dr. Langford and a pair of concerned footmen. Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Pratt convened near the mantelpiece, where the framed programme still stood, its smudge-prone glass reflecting the flickering firelight. Poirot rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Hastings, Pratt, our secondary mystery served only to entangle our thoughts. The true motive lies in the relationships among these people and the invisible threads that bind them." Hastings nodded, glancing toward the double doors where the remaining guests gathered. "We must revisit their connections, familial and emotional, to see which alliances might hide darker intentions." Inspector Pratt tapped a gloved finger against his notebook. "I have compiled their known relationships and alibis. May I present them?" He handed Poirot a small pad. Poirot unfolded the pages and scanned the shorthand. Fairfax and Fitzroy shared mutual charities. Langford was niece to Lady Castlebury. Pendleton had loaned stock during a market slump to Ames. Montague and Tripp collaborated on estate settlements. Hawthorne taught the children of Wentworth. Each pairing suggested trust or the potential for betrayal. "Excellent," Poirot murmured. "Let us begin with Lady Fitzroy and Lord Fairfax. Their shared philanthropic ventures appear harmonious, but do they conceal financial dependencies?" He looked up at Hastings. "Have you examined their ledger entries?" Hastings produced a small portfolio. "Yes, Poirot. Lord Fairfax donated generously to Fitzroy's foundation there, the condition that she host a gala at Prestwick Manor. When her funding dipped, he threatened to withdraw support unless she complied with certain discreet requests." Poirot's pale eyes gleamed. "Discreet requests? What sort?" Hastings continued quietly. "She was to grant him exclusive rights to bid on her family's heirlooms at private auctions. The locket, specifically, was to be part of an estate sale next month, an event that would have raised funds for her charity." Inspector Pratt whistled softly. "So Fairfax stood to gain financially if the locket remained unaccounted for, allowing him to claim it later." "Exactament." Poirot nodded. "Yet that motive is tempered by the social risk. Exposed, he would ruin Fitzroy's reputation and his own." Hastings tapped the portfolio. "Next, Dr. Langford and Ames. They share a mutual interest in medicine, and philanthropist Langford treats patients pro bono. Ames underwrites experimental treatments. Ames's recent financial backing funded a research wing where Langford works." Poirot smiled. "A partnership of convenience and gratitude. But gratitude can sour if debts go unpaid." He looked at Inspector Pratt. "Any records of Ames deferring payments or Langford pressing for funds?" Pratt consulted his notes. Indeed, Ames deferred her last 2 installments, blaming unexpected travel. Langford pressed politely but firmly, mentioning the wing's operating costs. Poirot's moustaches twitched. A minor tension, hardly enough to warrant grand theft and attempted poisoning, yet worth noting. He motioned to the next entry. "Montague and Tripp, the widow and the solicitor. They collaborate on estate settlements." "Yes." Hastings chimed in. Mrs. Montague offered to reunite disadvantaged youths with inheritance they never knew they had. Tripp, as solicitor, manages those bequests. Rumour has it that one such inheritance concerns Lady Castleberry's late cousin, whose estate includes this very locket. Poirot tapped the ledger page. Aha! If the locket belonged by right to a beneficiary Montague champions, and Tripp controls its disposal, they might conspire to multiply its value by theft, then split proceeds. Inspector Pratt's eyebrows rose, but they targeted Lady Castleberry. Did they believe she held the locket unfairly, and poisoning her would delay discovery? Poirot nodded slowly. A plausible orchestration. Yet Montague's philanthropic veneer makes it unlikely she'd stoop to crime so blatant unless backed into a corner. He then pointed to the final pair, Wentworth and Hawthorne. The Colonel's household employs her as governess to his nieces, officially a strict employer-employee relationship. Hastings frowned. Unofficially, gossip suggests Wentworth's financial difficulties. He gambled heavily in hopes of restoring his fortune lost substantially. Hawthorne's previous position as a private tutor ended abruptly under circumstances never explained. Poirot's grey eyes narrowed. Secret debt, sudden dismissal. Could Hawthorne's knowledge of his ruin give her motive? Or, conversely, could Wentworth manipulate her loyalty to facilitate theft? Inspector Pratt volunteered. Hawthorne's loyalty may have cost her livelihood. Blackmail is possible. Indeed, Poirot agreed. Now we have 4 potential conspiracies: Fairfax Fitzroy, Langford Ames, Montague Tripp, and Wentworth Hawthorne. Each pair bears hidden tensions above. Mere coincidence. He closed the ledger with a soft snap. Yet we must identify which connection allowed intimate knowledge of the locket's inscription. The microscopic script hand, the velvet's behavior. Only someone with both access and expertise could plan so precisely. Hastings considered. Who among them has that knowledge? Dr. Langford, as physician, might understand minute inscriptions, but she dismissed handling the velvet. Tripp, as solicitor, handles documents, but not artifacts. Ames funds medical research. Wentworth knows aristocratic heirlooms, but only superficially. Fairfax trades in charity reputation. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Yet one also possesses both legal acumen and personal access, Mr. Samuel Tripp. As solicitor, he arranged authentic documentation for the locket's provenance. He would know of the inner inscription. Pratt's head snapped up, but his gloves carried no metallic dust at first. Then how did he acquire residue? Poirot's gaze flickered. He handled the locket before framing the program. Then, he changed gloves via the butler to mask his trace. He pointed upward as if revealing a hidden design. He used the smudged ink as diversion. Smudge Lady Fitzroy's invitation, frame her. Then smudge the program frame, Colonel Wentworth. Smudge the teacup tongs frame, DuPont. Borrow Clogg's frame, the stranger. All while he examined the locket privately, removed the inscription, and planned its sale. Hastings's eyes widened. He needed the original inscription to forge new provenance making. The locket, legally unidentifiable and ripe for private sale among collectors. Poirot nodded, and the poisoning, not lethal only to incapacitate Lady Castleberry long enough to delay the discovery of the missing inscription. Timing was essential. Pratt closed his notebook. Then our culprit is Mr. Tripp. Poirot raised a hand. Let us confer with one final test. He addressed the drawing-room door. Captain Hastings, please summon Mr. Samuel Tripp. Guests remained calm. Moments later, Tripp appeared, spectacles low on his nose, expression composed. Poirot advanced, cane tapping. "Monsieur Tripp, you have served many families, ensuring that documents matched the property they describe. The locket's microscopic inscription mattered to you because it allowed you to alter its ownership." Tripp's lips quivered. "Monsieur Poirot, such accusations are bold." Poirot held up the framed program. "This smudge matches your signature, flourish eyes. Your penmanship is distinctive, and your gloves initially free of metallic dust litter bore residues when retrieved by the butler. You orchestrated every misdirection." Tripp's face paled. He reached for his gloves, but impossible. Poirot tapped the cane. "Inspector Pratt, may we have the invitations and program fragments?" Pratt handed them over, and Poirot laid them side by side. The smudges aligned perfectly, a continuation of the same stroke. Tripp's masked discomfort became guilt. "You manipulated these artifacts to obscure your crime." Tripp sank onto a chair. "I needed the funds for my clients' estates to prosper. The sale of such a rare locket would settle my debts and ensure the beneficiaries receive something in return, albeit from sale proceeds." Poirot inclined. "Justice can take many forms, monsieur, but not through theft." Hastings placed a hand on Tripp's shoulder. "Inspector Pratt." Pratt produced handcuffs. "Samuel Tripp, you are under arrest for theft, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy." He snapped the cuffs closed. As Tripp was led away, the guests exhaled collectively. Lady Fitzroy approached Poirot, gratitude in her eyes. "Monsieur, you have uncovered the truth hidden in plain sight." Poirot modestly brushed his coat. "The truth, madame, lies in the smallest details, and in the connections that bind us. Now, let us see that the locket's rightful fate is secured and that justice, however tempered, is served." The grand hall exhaled as the final knot of deception unraveled, proving that even the most elegant gatherings can harbor the darkest intrigues, waiting only for the light of deduction to reveal them. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clues. Hush. That fell over Prestwick Manor's grand hall after Mr. Tripp's arrest felt almost sacred. The crystal chandeliers above glimmered like silent sentinels, casting fractured rainbows upon the polished marble. Guests exchanged relieved glances, some hopeful, others pensive, wondering what final truths remained to be uncovered. Captain Hastings, still riding the exhilaration of the confession, leaned close to Poirot. "Mon ami, you spoke of one last secret clusum that changes everything." Hastings's voice trembled with anticipation. Poirot's grey eyes twinkled. "Indeed, Hastings, for while our dear solicitor's duplicity explains the theft and the smudged diversions, the precise motivand, the ultimate fate of the locket hinges upon one microscopic detail overlooked by most." He tapped his temple lightly. "A detail so small that only my little grey cells would notice." Inspector Pratt hovered nearby, eager to assist. "Shall we examine the locket's case one more time?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, but not the case. The locket itself. Hastings, please fetch it." Hastings darted to the side table where the empty gilt-silver box lay. Beside it, the locked velvet-lined case containing the locket now returned. Its inscription intact rested on a satin cushion. He carefully lifted the locket, suspended from its delicate chain, and handed it to Poirot. The detective cradled it in gloved hands, turning it so the soft lamplight caught its curved surface. The remains of lacquer clung to the gilt where the metal had been handled most. Poirot's gaze flitted to the inner rim. "Observe the inscription, Hastings." The curator's note spoke of a microscopic Latin phrase, veritas in umbris, truth in shadows. Yet, look here, he angled the locket so that the engraving glimmered. The final word appears incomplete. Hastings peered through his pince-nez. It reads veritas in then stops abruptly. Poirot nodded. Precisely. A clever forgery would remove the last letter, giving umbra, shade, instead of umbra's shadows. One letter changes singular to plural, meaning and conceals the true origin of the piece. Inspector Pratt frowned. So Trip not only stole the locket, but attempted to alter its inscription to facilitate a false provenance. Exactement, Poirot confirmed. He had the locket for only a few minutes behind closed doors, long enough to file away the S and polish the rim, but in his haste, did not remove all the metal filings. They lodged in the engraving deeper than his polishing could erase. He drew a slim jeweler's pick from his coat pocket tool, reserved for delicate examination. Under the lamp, he gently teased at the engraving's final letter. A tiny flake of gilt silver dislodged, revealing a faint curve beneath. Poirot held it up. Note this fragment, Hastings. It retains the original curve of the S, a microscopic witness to the crime. Hastings's eyes widened. Without it, the meaning shifts and a collector, unaware, would accept the variant inscription as authentic. Poirot placed the fragment in a small glass vial and returned the locket to its case. Now, the motive is clear. Trip intended to pass the locket as a unique, singular piece, its altered inscription giving it rarity value. He would sell it on the private market, then split the proceeds, justifying it as compensation for his scruples in legal work. Pratt tapped his chin. But what of Lady Castleberry's fainting? Was that simply to delay the discovery of the missing locket? Yes, Poirot agreed. He timed the tea collapse to coincide with the theft, ensuring it would spin the investigation toward poisoning rather than a simple disappearance. Yet he underestimated the resolve of a physician among the guests and the potency of ink. As a diversion, Lady Beatrice Castleberry hovered at the doorway, her composure regained, though her eyes still held a flicker of vulnerability. Poirot invited her forward. "Madame, here is your locket, restored to you with its true inscription." He unlocked the velvet case and handed it back. And here he produced the vial, is evidence of its attempted alteration. Lady Castleberry accepted the locket with trembling fingers. "Mon Dieu, Monsieur Poirot, thank you." She gazed at the engraving with renewed wonder. Veritas in umbris, truth in shadows. She pressed the chain against her heart. "I will treasure it all the more, knowing what it endured." Poirot inclined. "The shadows revealed the truth, Madame, and now justice is served." Hastings closed the velvet case softly. "Shall we deliver this fragment to the authorities, Poirot?" "One fragment among many clues," Poirot murmured, "but the most telling. Inspector Pratt, this will accompany Mr. Tripp's confession in his report." Pratt slipped the vial into his pocket with care. "It shall, monsieur." Poirot surveyed the assembled guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience and cooperation. Though we have uncovered the locket's fate and the thief's identity, your own courage in speaking truth has been commendable." Miss Veronica Ames approached, her steady gaze warm. "Monsieur Poirot, I must apologize for any unwitting role I played by tasting those sweets." Poirot smiled. "No apology needed, mademoiselle. Every detail, however small, brought us closer to the heart of this puzzle." Dr. Langford curtsied. Your skill, Monsieur Poirot, lies in seeing the unseen, and, for that, we are all in your debt. The detective tipped his hat. My pleasure. Now, let us conclude this affair with a final gathering where I shall reconstruct the events, piece by piece, for your understanding. Lady Fitzroy offered her arm to Hastings. I shall attend, Captain. I only wish to hear each revelation. As the guests reassembled before the now refilled pedestal, Poirot remained at the centre, cane tapping for attention. The locket's case lay upon the velvet once more, its velvet fibres aligned as they had been before the crime. Poirot took a deep breath, preparing to weave together every thread visible and hidden into the grand reveal that would follow. He glanced at Hastings with a small smile. The next chapter, Hastings, shall be the final gathering where all shall be laid bare. His gaze drifted to the closed double doors. But first, a moment to prepare our little scene. Hastings nodded, and together they waited that in mere minutes, the grand culmination of human motives, cunning diversions, and microscopic truths would bring this elaborate mystery to its satisfying close. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. Grand Hall's atmosphere had settled into an uneasy expectation as guests reconvened around the velvet-draped pedestal. Poirot stood at the centre, his posture composed, but his eyes bright with anticipation. One by one, the assembled party, Lady Beatrice Castlebury, Captain Hastings, Inspector Pratt, and the 10 remaining guests took their places in a loose circle. The hush was broken only by the faint ticking of a gilt brass clock and the soft rustle of silk skirts. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. Madame et Messieurs, before we proceed to the final gathering, I wish to observe how tensions have shifted now that the thief has been unmasked and the locket restored. Human nature often reveals itself most clearly under pressure. He turned to Lady Helena Fitzroy. Madame, he began, you stood to lose the most when your invitation was smudged, only to be exonerated. How do you feel toward Lord Fairfax, whose charitable demands jeopardized your reputation? Lady Fitzroy's cheeks coloured. She met Lord Fairfax's gaze across the circle. I feel gratitude to Monsieur Poirot for exposing the truth and regret that my association with Lord Fairfax might have implicated me. She turned to him. Reginald, I trust our collaboration on the charity continues, but perhaps with clearer boundaries. Lord Fairfax bowed his head, expression guarded. Of course, Helena. My intentions were misinterpreted. He glanced sideways at Dr. Langford, who observed him with cool detachment. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Langford. Doctor, you pressed Miss Ames about delayed payments. How does it sit with you that your professional alliance implicated an innocent party? Dr. Langford drew a breath, steadying herself. I regret any discomfort caused, but funding is essential to our research, without which many lives could be lost. My inquiry was driven by urgency, not suspicion. Miss Ames, seated beside her, raised an eyebrow. Urgency does not justify casting aspersions without evidence. I provided documentation of my travel. I expected that to suffice. Dr. Langford inclined, and I apologize for doubting you. Yet when one's name appears linked to a theft, one must investigate thoroughly. A murmur of assent and dissent rippled through the guests. Poirot, sensing the rising undercurrents, stepped in before it could erupt further. Thank you both. Let us next consider Mrs. Montague and Mr. Tripp's former partnership. He turned to Mrs. Agatha Montague. Madame, you and your solicitor once shared a vision for distributing hidden inheritances. How do you now view the man who betrayed that trust? Mrs. Montague's voice trembled, but she held her chin high. I grieve that Samuel's ambition overcame his integrity. His misdeeds cost us the trust of the families we sought to aid. Yet I remain committed to that work, and I will find another more trustworthy advocate. She glanced at Colonel Wentworth, standing stiffly at the circle's edge. Perhaps he would volunteer. Wentworth's expression tightened. My indebtedness is mine alone. I will not presume to step into another's role. Hastings gave a small cough, turning Poirot's attention to the Colonel and Miss Hawthorne. Colonel, your governess, Miss Hawthorne, stood by your side in moments of personal distress. How fares your confidence in her loyalty? Wentworth hesitated, then regarded Miss Hawthorne with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Miss Hawthorne has served my family with admirable discretion, yet I cannot ignore rumours that her abrupt dismissal from a prior post stemmed from impropriety. Miss Hawthorne's face paled. Colonel, you know nothing of the circumstances. I left that position only when my employer insisted upon accusations without proof. She looked around, voice firm. I have no motive to harm Lady Castleberry or her property. Others exchanged looks. Whispers skittered like startled birds. Poirot's voice cut through the tension. These tensions between collaborators, patrons, and confidenza, the crucible in which secrets either perish or burn brightest. Now, I invite Captain Hastings to recount our timeline of events, highlighting when each party's actions overlapped. Hastings stepped forward, unfolding a small notebook. He outlined the day's key moments: the delivery of the locket at 10:45 a.m., the inspection by Dr. Langford, the arrival of guests at 5 p.m., the theft discovered moments before the unveiling, the tea incident, and finally, Tripp's apprehension after the final clue. As Hastings narrated, faces shifted, some betraying relief, others thinly veiled anxiety. When he finished, Poirot nodded. This timeline reveals the narrow windows during which our culprit acted, but it also shows where alliances provided cover. He raised a hand, silencing a gasp from Lady Fitzroy. For example, Miss Ames's glove change was facilitated by the butler, yet only because she wished to conceal cocoa stains. A courtesy, yes, but one that cleared her of suspicion when we needed to frame another. Miss Ames clenched her fists. I had no idea, Patience, Poirot interjected gently. It illustrates how unguarded kindness can be exploited. He turned to Dr. Langford. Your medical expertise allowed you to diagnose Lady Castleberry's collapse, but also risked drawing attention away from the locket's disappearance. Dr. Langford nodded slowly. I acted swiftly. See now how that strategy served the thief's misdirection. Poirot's gaze swept the room, and so the tensions among you, the friction of charity and finance, the strains of gratitude and debt formed a tapestry in which the true culprit wove his deception. He tapped his cane, yet one tension remains unresolved: the personal debt of Colonel Wentworth, known only to Miss Hawthorne and himself. That single, unspoken pressure lurks beneath courtesy and loyalty. The Colonel stiffened. You insinuate, Poirot held up a hand. Merely observe. Emotional debts can serve as powerful motives, but you, Colonel, repaid yours today by preserving Miss Hawthorne's position during these inquiries. Wentworth's jaw softened. She is innocent. My honour obliged me to defend her. Poirot inclined. Precisely. Observe how loyalties shift when people suspect guilt. Some withdraw trust. Others extend it at personal cost. Our suspect counted on those shifts to deflect suspicion, cultivating doubt among allies while hiding in plain sight. He paused, letting tension ripen. Mesdames et messieurs, the stage is set for the final confrontation. The tensions you feel, no fear, suspicion, regret her, the invisible bonds that will unravel when the truth is revealed. A hush fell once more. Hastings exchanged a glance with Pratt, both sensing that the moment of reckoning drew near. Poirot tapped his cane a second time. In mere moments, we shall gather at the pedestal for the grand expose. Prepare yourselves. Your truths and intentions will soon be laid bare in the light of justice. As the guests arranged themselves for the concluding scene, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The polished veneer of high society had cracked, revealing fractures of doubt and conflict. Only one piece, Poirot's final confrontation, remained to bind the fragments into a coherent whole. And when that moment came, every tension would either dissolve in understanding or shatter under the weight of revelation. Chapter 12. The confrontation, the grand hall's tense hush, deepened as the assembled guests took their places for what Poirot promised would be a decisive moment. The velvet-draped pedestal stood empty now, its purpose served, yet it seemed to pulse with the promise of revelation. Poirot stood before it, his cane resting lightly against the marble floor, eyes sweeping each face in turn as if drawing threads of truth from the very air. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, voice cool and measured, we have traced every clue, examined every motive, and followed the tangled paths of misdirection. Now the time has come for the final test. I ask one among you to step forward. He allowed the silence to stretch, each guest shifting in their place under the weight of expectation. Slowly, Mr. Samuel Tripp advanced. His usual composure had given way to a pale tension. His careful spectacles reflected the chandelier's light like twin watchful eyes. He stopped before Poirot, hands clenched at his sides. The others watched breathlessly. Monsieur Tripp, Poirot said, inclining his head, your knowledge of legal documents and provenance proved invaluable. Yet tonight, that very knowledge betrays you. He tapped the pedestal. I wish you to recount, in your own words, how you came to learn of the microscopic inscription on Lady Castleberry's locket. Tripp's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I read the curator's certificate, monsieur. It detailed the inscription Latin script along the inner rim veritas, in umbris, I. He hesitated, lip trembling. Poirot's eyes narrowed fractionally. You read the certificate, and you learned the precise meaning. Literal translation, singular form, truth in shadow, not plural. Yet none but the curator. One other had access to that document before tonight. He paused, voice dropping. Would you share how you came to know not only the phrase, but its grammatical nuance? Tripp's hands flew to his coat pockets, rattling them nervously. I have studied Latin many years ago. I recognized the case ending immediately. A ripple of surprise passed among the guests. Dr. Langford raised an eyebrow. Lady Fitzroy's mouth curved in shock. Hastings's pen hovered above his notebook. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. Impressive knowledge, monsieur, and yet our curator's certificate bore no grammatical hint of singular or plural. It merely quoted the inscription without explanatory note. You would need to examine the locket itself, to trace the faint curve of the final S, to discern its precise meaning. Tripp's eyes flickered, darting toward the closed case where the locket lay. He swallowed, voice tight. I I observed the engraving under a magnifying glass once before the unveiling. Poirot's moustaches quivered in satisfaction. Ah, a crucial admission. You alone had both the opportunity and the tools to scrutinize the inscription firsthand. None of the other guests possessed a magnifier. He turned to the gathered party. Is that not so, ladies and gentlemen? Who here carried such an instrument tonight? No hand rose. Even Colonel Wentworth, stalwart until now, hovered uncertainly. Miss Hawthorne's lips parted in shock. Mrs. Montague's gentle face blanched. Poirot smiled gently at Tripp. You see, Monsieur Tripp, your solitary knowledge of the inscription's nuance gives away the length of your little grey cell's curiosity. He pointed at the pedestal. It was your hand that lifted the name fragment, your file that removed the final stroke of the S, and your polishing cloth that tried but failed to erase the metal filings. And it was your mind that devised every smudge of ink, every borrowed clog, and every poisoned cup to cover your tracks. Tripp's shoulders sagged. He glanced at Lady Fitzroy, whose eyes held both empathy and reproach. I never wished to harm anyone, he protested softly. I needed the funds. The sale would have secured legacies for those I serve. Poirot's gaze was unyielding, a noble justification to the thief. But even the best of intentions cannot excuse betrayal. He tapped his cane. Tell us, monsieur, what became of the original lace pouch in which you carried away the locket? Tripp closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Despair writ plain upon his features. In my study, I locked it in my desk. I meant to return it after forging new documents. He exhaled. I confess, I panicked when I heard of Lady Castleberry's collapse. I feared she would recover too soon and expose me. Poirot inclined. Yet you need not have resorted to such extremes. Mercy might have spared you, monsieur, had you repented at first clue. Tripp's head dropped. I am sorry, Monsieur Poirot. I am sorry to all of you. Inspector Pratt moved forward. Monsieur Tripp, I must ask you to hand over the locket, the fragment, and any remaining documents. Tripp extended trembling hands, yielding the velvet pouch and the vial containing the miniature silver flake. Hastings stepped beside Pratt. Should we place him under arrest now, Inspector? Pratt nodded gravely. Yes, Samuel Tripp, you are under arrest for grand theft, attempted poisoning, and obstruction of justice. He produced cuffs and secured Tripp's hands. A hush enveloped the hall as Tripp was led away. Lady Castleberry approached Poirot, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Mercy, Monsieur Poirot, you have brought justice with such art and precision. Poirot bowed his head. It was not I alone, madame, but the smallest of clues and the courage of your guests to speak truth when pressed. Now let us prepare for the final gathering, where I shall reconstruct each step of this affair for your satisfaction. As Tripp's footsteps faded, Hastings turned to Poirot. Well done, mon ami. His confession was secured without a single false hint. Poirot's eyes sparkled. The true confrontation is not the arrest, Hastings, but the moment when a guilty mind cannot disguise the knowledge it was never meant to possess. Now, the final piece awaits. With the culprit in custody and the locket secured, the grand hall exhaled in relief and in eager anticipation of Poirot's ultimate revelation, to be delivered in the next chapter. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Inspector Pratt's firm grip on Samuel Tripp's arm guided the disgraced solicitor through the ornate double doors toward the servants' corridor. Poirot and Captain Hastings followed close behind. each footstep echoing in the hush. The guests remained in the grand hall, murmuring among themselves as the arresting party disappeared from sight. Just as Pratt reached the first bend, Tripp's eyes darted left to a narrow archway leading to the service staircase. With a sudden, desperate wrench, he yanked his arm free and bolted down the corridor, sending the constables lining the hallway into startled pursuit. After him, Pratt barked, drawing his service revolver and sprinting forward. Hastings vaulted a low bench. Kane abandoned in the scramble and followed. Poirot paused only a heartbeat, his grey eyes cold with calculation before intercepting the chase. Tripp, panic giving him unnatural speed, barreled through the archway and into the dimly lit service stairwell. The flickering wall sconces cast long shadows as he bounded down the narrow steps, his polished shoes clipping dangerously against stone. He reached the bottom just as Hastings and Pratt emerged. Panting. Ahead lay the scullery door, slightly ajar, beyond which lay the winding passage to the stable courtyard. Outside, a late summer drizzle glossed the cobblestones. Tripp reached the threshold, hand outstretched, but a firm voice halted him. "Monsieur Tripp, you shall go no further." Poirot emerged from the darkness, lantern in hand, blocking the exit. Tripp skidded to a halt, eyes wide. "You knew I would try this," he panted. "You set me up." Poirot inclined his head serenely. "I anticipated when one is desperate, one seeks the path of least resistance. The route to freedom lay through the scullery and stable yard, yes." Tripp's shoulders sagged as Hastings and Pratt closed in. "I will not go back to that hall," he snarled. "They will mock me, condemn me. It is not they who condemn you, monsieur, but your own choices," Poirot replied gently. He motioned behind. "Come now, before you injure yourself further." Tripp hesitated, gaze flitting to the rain-slicked courtyard beyond. Then, with a defeated sigh, he allowed Pratt to reapply the cuffs. Hastings retrieved his cane from stair landing and dusted it off. "Poirot," Hastings remarked as they escorted Tripp upward, "you must have stationed officers at every possible exit." Poirot's lips curved. "Indeed, Hastings. When I deduced the theft, I requested Inspector Pratt to secure all egress points, including the service passages. It was clear our culprit would attempt flight." Pratt nodded, holstering his revolver. "Your forethought saved us a search in the dark. Now we shall return him to the hall for the final gathering. Ensure no further diversions." They re-entered the grand hall to find Lady Beatrice Castleberry and the remaining guests awaiting their return. The detective paused at the threshold to collect himself, straightening his jacket, smoothing his mustaches, then stepped forward to reclaim center stage. Lady Castleberry rose gracefully. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "your anticipation of every twist has been remarkable." Poirot inclined. "Madame, it is gratitude for your hospitality that compels me to foresee any danger to your guests or property. Now we must conclude this affair." He signaled Hastings. "Captain, please bring forward the locket and the evidence vial." Hastings complied, lifting the velvet-lined case and the small glass vial from a side table. The guests watched in solemn silence as Poirot placed them upon the pedestal's richly draped surface. Poirot turned to the assembled company. "Madame et messieurs, you have borne witness to crime, to misdirection, and to a desperate escape attempt, yet no scheme withstands the light of scrutiny or the anticipation of its author's inevitable desperation. Let us proceed to the final piece, the unraveling of motive and the restoration of order." Inspector Pratt motioned the remaining constables to secure the corridor doors, ensuring the hall became both stage and sanctuary for Poirot's reveal. The detective's pale blue eyes swept the circle of face. Is each marked now by relief, respect, or lingering doubt? Soon, Poirot said quietly, "We shall see that even the most cunning plan cannot outrun the consequences of one's actions. In the final gathering, every thread of human intention will be woven into a tapestry of truth, and every guest will understand how their own choices influenced the fate of the locket and of one man's life." As the guests took their seats, once more the grand hall seemed to exhale, bracing itself for the conclusive act. Tripp's thwarted flight had only heightened the stakes and confirmed that, in Poirot's world, the escape of the guilty is but a fleeting illusion. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place, the grand hall, now restored to its former hushed grandeur, bore witness to the culmination of Poirot's meticulous inquiry. The velvet-draped pedestal at its center held the gilt silver locket, its restored inscription glinting in the soft lamplight. The assembled guests, Lady Beatrice Castleberry, Captain Hastings, Inspector Pratt, Dr. Langford, Lady Helena Fitzroy, Lord Reginald Fairfax, Miss Veronica Ames, Colonel Archibald Wentworth, Miss Lydia Hawthorne, Mrs. Agatha Montague, and the subdued footman formed a semicircle around Poirot. Even the tapestries seemed to lean in, eager for the detectives. Final unraveling. Poirot tapped his cane lightly on the marble floor. "Madame et messieurs, we arrive at the moment where every clue, every motive, every misdirection coalesces into a single, unmistakable truth. I shall proceed methodically, retracing our steps and illuminating the one detail that sealed Monsieur Tripp's fate." He paused, measuring each face with calm precision, before continuing. "First, recall the smudged invitation, designed to conceal Lady Fitzroy's presence and draw suspicion away from the true criminal. Next, the velvet crease on the pedestal, showing the locket removed by lifting backward. Then, the borrowed, overchosen, enticing false trail crafted to implicate an outsider. Lastly, the poisoned tea, meant to incapacitate Lady Castleberry and divert our attention entirely from the missing artifact. A soft murmur confirmed their memories. Poirot raised a slender finger. Yet each of these diversions bore the same calling card, the smudge of that distinctive blue ink. An ink only one person in this room applied deliberately, did so again and again to hide his guilt. He nodded to Inspector Pratt, who produced the framed program, Lady Fitzroy, invitation, and the teacup tongs. Notice how the ink's thickness and flow are identical on each item. This is not happenstance, it is the handwriting of our culprit. He held up a fresh sheet upon which he had practiced the same smudge strokes. "Monsieur Tripp, your signature flourish matches this ink exactly." Tripp's face tightened, though he had confessed. Poirot let the moment settle before moving on. But even a signature smear could be disguised. We needed something more concrete, more microscopic, to link you irrefutably to the locket's alteration. He stepped toward the pedestal and lifted the velvet-lined case. With a delicate touch, he opened it, revealing the locket. He held it between thumb and forefinger, tilting it so that the engraving caught the lamplight. Behold the inscription, Veritas in Umbris. Notice the final S, its faint curvature nearly erased by Monsieur Tripp's file. But see here, he withdrew the tiny sliver of silver from its file. This fragment preserves the original stroke, It is a piece of truth that cannot be polished away. A ripple of astonishment passed through the guests. Poirot placed the fragment beside the locket. One must know precisely where to file, to remove only the last letter, and to do so without disturbing the surrounding engraving requires skill. Monsieur Tripp, as solicitor and scholar, you alone possessed both the knowledge of Latin and access to a magnifying lens to guide your hand. Tripp's shoulders slumped further. His gaze dropped to the floor. Poirot continued, "You then replaced your worn gloves with fresh pairs conveniently fetched by the butler from the cloakroom after handling the locket, ensuring that metallic dust would not cling to the gloves you arrived wearing. Yet you did not account for the tiny filings left beneath the engraving, particles too fine for broad cleaning, but visible when you tested your gloves afterward." He signaled to Captain Hastings, who brought forward the silver dust collected earlier. Poirot laid it on a handkerchief for all to see. "This dust, harvested from the inside of your gloves, matches the composition of the locket's gilt surface. It is the fingerprint of metal itself." Seeing no reaction from Tripp but shame, Poirot shifted to motive. "Now, why orchestrate such an elaborate scheme? Because you faced debts too large to repay by legal fees alone. You intended to sell the locket on the private market, presenting it as a unique, singular piece with its altered inscription, an irresistible rarity among collectors." He turned to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, this locket belonged by right to your late cousin's heir, which you intended to honor by exhibiting it. Samuel Tripp, as your solicitor, prepared the legal documentation for future sales, trusting him. Implicitly, the trust you extended allowed him private access to the artifact and the opportunity to exploit it." Lady Castlebury's eyes brimmed. I can scarcely believe someone so close would betray us thus." Poirot offered a gentle nod. "Betrayal can lurk in the most familiar hands, madame, but we have brought it to light." He faced the remaining guests. "Consider also how each of you, through your own virtues, charity, scholarship, loyalty, was drawn into the web of deceit. Lady Fitzroy's smudged invitation, Dr. Langford's earnest inquiries, Miss Ames's generosity with chocolate, Colonel Wentworth's protective defence of Miss Hawthorne, and Mrs. Montague's philanthropic zeal, were all manipulated to distract, to divide, to conceal." A hush fell as Poirot's gaze swept the room one final time. Yet ordinary virtues cannot mask extraordinary crime. The strength of truth resides in its smallest details, and tonight, the microscopic sliver of silver, coupled with the signature ink smear, has laid bare the culprit's identity. He lowered the locket into the velvet case. "Inspector Pratt, please ensure that Monsieur Tripp's confession, the fragment, and the evidence are duly recorded. I trust justice will follow swiftly." Pratt stepped forward, solemnly gathering the items. He glanced at each guest with respect. "Indeed, Monsieur." Poirot turned to the company. "Mesdames et Messieurs, this affair draws to its close. Let us remember that even the grandest halls can conceal the most subtle crimes, and that only through attention to detail and unwavering resolve can justice prevail." Lady Castlebury approached, offering her hand. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have preserved both my family's honour and my peace of mind." Poirot bowed. "It has been my privilege, madame." Captain Hastings smiled warmly. Another mystery solved to perfection. As the guests applauded softly, the grand hall seemed to exhale its tension. Lamps glowed brighter, tapestries settled, and the velvet cushion returned to stillness. In the afterglow of revelation, only the locket remained a testament to the resilience of truth. Even when enshrouded by the most intricate shadows. Chapter 15. The final gathering. The grand hall once again fell into an expectant hush as guests took their seats in a semicircle before the velvet-draped pedestal. Outside, the last light of day waned, and the chandelier's crystals caught each flicker of the dying embers in the hearth. Lady Beatrice Castleberry, supported by Dr. Langford, regained her place of honour at the centre front. Behind her, the remaining guests, shaken yet composed, watched the detective's every movement. Poirot entered, cane in hand, his gait measured and deliberate. He paused before the pedestal, casting a glance at the closed locket, casing the vial containing the tiny silver fragment. Mesdames, Messieurs, he began, voice clear and resonant. Tonight you have witnessed an extraordinary sequence of events: theft, attempted poisoning, flight, and confession. Now, before we bring this affair to its close, it is my privilege to guide you through a step-by-step reconstruction of how these crimes were committed and why. He raised a gloved finger. First, the object, a late Georgian gilt-silver locket bearing a microscopic inscription reading Veritas, in umbrous truth, in shadows. You recall how Dr. Langford carefully unpacked the velvet case at 10:45 a.m., ensuring the artifact's safety. From that moment until its display at 5 p.m., the locket lay under Lady Beatrice's sole supervision, its box locked away. Poirot tapped the velvet covering. Next, the smudge on the invitation. Only one invitation. Lady Fitzroy's bore the telltale smear of cobalt blue ink. This smear was applied deliberately at the station by a man of rural carriage who lingered as Lady Fitzroy boarded. That smudge concealed her attendance and planted guilt upon her alone, diverting suspicion from a far more intimate betrayer. He held up the framed invitation. Observe how the line of the ink stroke parallels the flourish on Mr. Tripp's own handwriting. Flourish he would reproduce throughout the evening to camouflage his actions behind a tapestry of diversions. A footman repositioned the glass vial beside the invitation, and Poirot continued. At 5 p.m., the locket was discreetly lifted from its display by someone who knew precisely where to apply pressure. The velvet fibers lifted backward along the hinge, leaving an almost invisible crease. Moments later, that same individual disposed of the locket in a small vellum pouch, pocketed beneath a tailored coat. He paced slowly along the group. Then came the first false lead, a pair of dusty overshoes, borrowed by the same rural stranger whose cane and muffled mouth drew all eyes. The overshoes, coated in sawdust and metallic residue, led Inspector Pratt to the stables, only to reveal a red herring polished by a stable hand's brass cleaning cloth. Poirot paused, eyes bright with satisfaction. A clever subterfuge, yet ultimately irrelevant. He turned toward Colonel Wentworth and Miss Hawthorne. Meanwhile, suspicions fell upon those loyal to each other, Dr. Langford and Miss Ames. Lady Fitzroy and Lord Fairfax's partnership susceptible to tension. But these connections served only to distract from the solitude required to alter a locket's inscription behind closed doors. Poirot raised the vial. Now, the second crime, an attempted poisoning of your hostess. A silver sugar tongue, smudged with that same distinctive ink, was used to stir tea laced with a mild irritant, sufficient to induce collapse but not death. This act occurred as Monsieur Dupont returned gloves to Miss Ames, leaving the teacup temporarily unattended. Once again, a carefully timed misdirection. He replaced the vial and gestured at the teapot and cup. Notice how the teapot bore no smudge, while the tongs did a silent signature left by the perpetrator, designed to implicate an innocent hand. He shifted to face the assembled guests. Thus, two crimes both executed with the same calling. Card Poirot raised both hands, palms outward. Yet it was not until the microscopic examination of the inscription that our culprit's identity crystallized. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a jeweler's pick. Here, under high magnification, we discovered that the final letter S had been filed away with surgical precision, removing the plural case to create an illusion of singular rarity. Only someone with knowledge of Latin and access to a magnifier would dare such an alteration. He laid the pick beside the fragment. That person then took pains to remove any larger traces of metal, replaced worn gloves via the cloakroom, and applied fresh ink smudges to each major clue invitation program. Tonks threading a silver-blue trail from one to the next, Poirot surveyed each face. Ladies and gentlemen, consider how easily the truth might have been lost amid so many diversions. But when we follow each thread, each crease, each grain of dust, each smear of ink, the tapestry unfurls to reveal the singular design at its heart. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. The guests exchanged glances, some rueful, others enlightened, yet none dared speak, for Poirot's narration held them in rapt attention. Finally, Poirot said, lowering his voice, "Consider the motive: crippling debts, legal fees beyond reason, a desperate need to secure funds for those under one's charge. The desire to aid others became warped into a scheme of theft and deception. And so, through the careful study of a gift meant to symbolize truth, our culprit believed he could twist reality to serve his own ends." He straightened, tapping the velvet once more. "Now that you understand the chronology, the means, and the motive, you stand at the threshold of a deeper revelation, the moment when the guilty mind, confronted with the weight of evidence, must acknowledge its own folly. That mise Amos shall be the subject of my next address, the grand reveal, in which I shall name the offender and present the final proof that none may dispute." Poirot stepped back, eyes sweeping the room. "Until then, reflect upon how truth, though obscured by shadows, remains ever present to those who seek it. Prepare yourselves, for the next chapter of this affair shall draw the curtain on a performance of misdirection, and cast the light of justice upon one very particular soul." He tipped his head in a measured bow, signaling the end of the reconstruction. The guests remained silent, hearts pounding with anticipation. Outside, the last glow of dusk faded, and the hall's lamps burned bright, casting long shadows that would soon be banished by the clarity of Poirot's final disclosure. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Poirot paused in the centre of the grand hall, allowing the weight of his reconstruction to settle like a cloak around the assembled company. The lamp's glow caught the crystallized tension in each face. He raised a slender hand, his little grey cells alight with conviction. "Mesdames et messieurs, you have journeyed with me through every twist and turn of this affair. We have traced the stolen locket's path, unravelled the clever mystery, and examined the minute fragment that betrayed the thief's identity. The moment has come, therefore, to name the culprit and expose the motive that drove him to betray trust so profoundly." He turned slowly, addressing each guest in turn, before fixing his gaze on the man seated at the far side of the circle. "Mr. Samuel Tripp, solicitor." Tripp's posture had stiffened, his countenance a mask of dawning realization. "It was you, Monsieur Tripp, who applied the initial smear of ink to Lady Fitzroy's invitation at the station, Poirot began, voice measured. You alone knew. Her name might appear on that card, and yet wished to conceal her presence. From there, you orchestrated a sequence of smudges on the framed program in this hall, on the silver sugar tongs in the drawing room, and finally on the teacup rim wall to distract suspicion from your singular objective. He lifted the framed invitation, holding it aloft for all to see. Here is the first smear intentionally placed to frame an innocent lady. He lowered it and retrieved the program fragment. And here is the second transferred from one frame to the next to continue the deception and to draw inspection away from the pedestal. Poirot stepped toward the pedestal, where the velvet-lined case and the vial containing the silver fragment lay side by side. But smudges alone would not be sufficient. So you exploited the service passages, he continued, glancing at the double doors leading to the West Wing corridors. You borrowed overshoes to implicate an imaginary stranger, knowing the routine would provide an alibi for any footprints found in sawdust. He signaled to Inspector Pratt, who held out the dust-smeared clogs. Poirot tapped one sole. You believed this false lead would keep us chasing shadows while you wielded. Your magnifier and jewelers pick upon the locket itself. He lifted the small vial, and here, the microscopic silver flake you discarded in your haste, a sliver of the final S from our inscription, Veritas in Umbris. That tiny fragment, preserved in this vial, bears witness to your precise tampering. Poirot replaced the fragment and turned fully to Trip. You intended to remove the plural ending, creating Veritas in Umbra, singular rarity, to inflate the locket's value among private collectors. You practiced Latin, knew its nuances, and had access to a magnifying glass privileges of your profession. Trip's shoulders slumped. He met Poirot's gaze, shame and defiance warring in his expression. Poirot continued without pause. When we discovered the empty case at 5 p.m., you set in motion your next misdirection, the poisoned tea. Using the same smudged ink on the sugar tongs, you administered a mild irritant to Lady Beatrice Castleberry, prompting her collapse. That diversion gave you time to slip the locket into your coat and to close the box behind you before the crowds. Attention returned. Poirot held the silver sugar tongs aloft. Here they are inscribed with ink identical to your handwriting. And here he gestured to the teacup, the rim that bore no natural mark but the imprint of your finger. A signal to mislead the investigation toward foul play rather than theft. He stepped back, allowing the truth to resonate through the hall. Finally, when Inspector Pratt confronted you with mounting evidence, you sought escape through the service stairway, another attempt to slip away from consequences. Yet even then, you underestimated the thoroughness of our preparations and the foresight to secure all exits. Poirot's voice softened. Monsieur Trip, you once devoted your talents to securing rightful inheritances for others. That honor made you privy to legal documents and to the provenance of precious heirlooms. When debts overwhelmed you, you believed you could repurpose your knowledge for your own gain, believing that a single theft, executed with precision, would go unnoticed amid the distractions you created. He stepped forward, lowering his voice to a gentle resonance. But justice is not blind. It sees in microscopic detail, a single silver flake, a line of ink, a crease in velvet. These minute elements conspired to reveal your guilt. Poirot allowed a moment's silence, then addressed the guests. You have witnessed how an ordinary gathering can be transformed by one person's desperate measures. Let this be a reminder that even the most subtle deviation from truth leaves an indelible mark, and, that integrity, once compromised, cannot remain hidden in shadow. He turned back to Trip Mies Amos. I present to you the final proof. The matching ink smudges, the metallic residue on the gloves, the microscopic fragment, and the timeline that aligns each act. Now, Inspector Pratt, will you read, monsieur? Trip his charges. Inspector Pratt stepped forward, pulling a leather-bound ledger from his coat. He cleared his throat and read, Samuel Trip, you stand accused of grand theft of a valuable family heirloom, attempted poisoning of Lady Beatrice Castleberry, and multiple counts of conspiracy, obstruction, and flight. How do you plead? Trip swallowed audibly, then spoke in a low voice, guilty. His head bowed, the weight of his actions finally broken. A hush settled, punctuated only by the soft crackle of the hearth. Lady Castleberry rose, her voice steady but tender. Monsieur Poirot, you have restored order and given my family peace. I thank you, Poirot bowed. It was my privilege, madame. Let this revelation stand as proof that shadows may obscure, but they cannot extinguish the light of truth. As constables moved to escort Trip from the hall, the guests exchanged. Solemn nods, gratitude and relief etched on their faces. Poirot lingered by the pedestal, gazing at the closed locket case, before turning toward the doors that led to Lady Castleberry's chambers, ready to deliver the final chapter of his reflections. The reveal complete, Prestwick Manor settled into a calm resolve. The echoes of deception replaced by the clear tones of justice fulfilled. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The hush that followed Monsieur Trip's guilty plea in Prestwick Manor's grand hall felt almost sacred. The crystal chandelier's prisms scattered soft motes of light across the assembled guests, each bearing the weight of relief, betrayal, or contemplative regret. Inspector Pratt stood by the exit, overseeing the constables as they led Samuel Trip through the double doors toward awaiting carriages. The subdued rustle of silk and soft footsteps marked his departure, leaving behind an atmosphere both sombre and resolute. Lady Beatrice Castleberry rose from her seat beside Dr. Langford, glancing first at Poirot, then at her remaining guests. Thank you all for your patience and courage tonight, she said, her voice steady despite the earlier shock. This household, though privileged, has learned that trust must be guarded as vigilantly as any treasure. She offered a gentle smile to those gathered. Let us now ensure that despite this betrayal, gentleness and kindness endure. Captain Hastings stepped forward, closing the velvet-lined case and lifting the locket toward Lady Castleberry. Madame, your heirloom is safe once more, its inscription intact and its meaning restored. He offered the chain. May it remain a symbol of truth guiding your family forward. Lady Castleberry accepted the locket with trembling hands. She opened the case and let the chain fall around her neck. The soft glint of gilt silver against her satin bodice caught the light. Veritas in umbras, she murmured, tracing the inscription's curve. Truth in shadows, yet never quite lost. She looked up at Poirot. This will remind us all that even when deceivers lurk unseen, honesty prevails. Dr. Langford advanced to Lady Castleberry's side. Madame, if you will permit me, I can administer a tonic to restore your strength. She offered a small silver flask. Lady Castleberry nodded appreciatively, and Dr. Langford poured a restorative cordial, the faint scent of lavender assuaging the lingering tension as the hostess regained her composure. Poirot addressed the guests. Madame et messieurs, this evening's events have tested both human ingenuity and human fallibility. We have seen how desperation can lead one astray, yet also how virtue and attentiveness can bring truth to light. He paused, letting the words resonate. I trust that each of you will carry forward the lessons of this night of vigilance, integrity, and the power of observation. Lord Reginald Fairfax stepped to the front, bowing his head in acknowledgement. Monsieur Poirot, allow me to express my gratitude. Your deductions not only preserved a priceless family treasure, but also spared us further misfortune. It has been an honor to witness your methods. He turned to Lady Fitzroy, offering his arm. Helen, shall we walk the gardens? The evening air might soothe frayed nerves. Lady Fitzroy inclined her head, and together they made their exit through the softly lit corridor. Miss Veronica Ames approached Dr. Langford. Your quick diagnosis saved Madame's life, Doctor, and your integrity throughout these proceedings was an inspiration. She offered her hand, which Dr. Langford shook warmly. Thank you, Veronica. Let us continue our work together, medicine and research, for the good of all. Colonel Wentworth and Miss Hawthorne exchanged a respectful nod as they prepared to depart. Wentworth offered his arm to the governess. Miss Hawthorne, it seems my household owes you more gratitude than I ever expressed. Miss Hawthorne smiled faintly. It was my duty, Colonel, and yours to recognize it. They exited quietly, the hush of the drawing-room enveloping them. Mrs. Agatha Montague lingered, placing a hand on Poirot's shoulder. I shall rededicate myself to philanthropy with renewed humility. No cause, however noble, justifies deceit. She paused. Your counsel has illuminated the path forward. Poirot offered a gracious smile. Your charity, madame, will shine all the brighter for its sincerity. Inspector Pratt returned to the hearth, where the silver fragment and inked programme lay displayed on a low table. He tapped the glass vial and nodded. I shall file these as evidence, monsieur. Scotland Yard will ensure Monsieur Tripp pays his debt to justice. He saluted Poirot and departed, the constables in his wake. Poirot remained, surveying the empty chairs and spotless marble floor. At his side, Captain Hastings crouched to pick up the fallen notebook. Mon ami, Hastings said softly, another. Case closed. Yet the ripple of this crime will touch many beyond these walls. Poirot's gaze lingered on the smudgeless velvet cushion. Indeed, Hastings, a single act of desperation can cast long shadows. But tonight we have proven that truth, though obscured, endures. He rose and placed a hand on Hastings's shoulder. Shall we leave the remainder of the arrangements? To Lady Castleberry's staff, I believe Madame could use a moment's rest. Hastings nodded. Of course. But first, he looked toward the empty pedestal. Shall we ensure the locket's case is securely returned to the library vault? Poirot inclined. Yes, let us honor the artifact's rightful place. And then, mon ami, perhaps we might enjoy her drawing rooms, tea and poison this time. Hastings laughed quietly. I would like that very much, Poirot. Together they crossed the hall, extinguishing lamps as they passed, leaving only the glow of the hearth to illuminate the silent tapestries. In the stillness of the manor, truth's gentle triumph resonated, a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, shines brightest when forged through keen deduction and unwavering resolve. Chapter 18. The closing, remarking the afterglow of revelation, Prestwick Manor's grand hall settled into a serene hush. The crystal chandeliers, once witness to frantic diversions and sudden crises, now cast a gentle luminescence upon the polished marble. The assembled guests, Lady Beatrice Castleberry, Captain Hastings, Dr. Langford, Lady Helena Fitzroy, Lord Reginald Fairfax, Miss Veronica Ames, Colonel Archibald Wentworth, Miss Lydia Hawthorne, and Mrs. Agatha Montague stood in a loose semicircle. Each face bore the soft relief that follows tragedy averted, injustice corrected, and truth, at last, laid bare. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stood before them, cane in hand, his posture the very image of poise. He surveyed the circle of friends and former suspects with those pale, keen eyes. For a long moment he said nothing, allowing the silence to emphasize the gravity and the triumph of the moment. Then, in his gently accented English, he spoke. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have navigated a labyrinth of smudged invitations, velvet creases, borrowed overshoes, and poisoned tea. We have traced microscopic metal filings and ink strokes. We have confronted deception in its finest form. Yet, through it all, one constant guided us, the unwavering pursuit of truth." He paused, letting the words settle. Lady Castlebury gripped the locket's case in her hands, its velvet still bearing the faint indentation where her heirloom had once rested, almost as if the cushion itself had absorbed every secret. Hastings, ever modest, shifted uncomfortably, yet his eyes shone with pride. Poirot continued, voice smooth and resonant. "This case has been instructive on many levels. We have seen how desperation can lead a man trusted and respected to betray those he once served. We have witnessed how cunning misdirection can threaten to eclipse justice. And yet we have also seen the power of observation, the value of patience, and the strength of moral courage." He looked directly at each guest in turn. "Dr. Langford, your steadfast care for Lady Beatrice reminded us that compassion need not blind us to inquiry. Lady Fitzroy, your dignity in the face of false accusation exemplified grace under pressure. Colonel Wentworth's defence of Miss Hawthorne showed that loyalty can transcend suspicion. Mrs. Montague, your charitable heart, once manipulated, will now shine more authentically in future endeavours. Miss Ames, your generosity of spirit brought comfort in moments of fear, and Lord Fairfax, your willingness to clarify boundaries demonstrates that even the most benevolent intentions must be tempered with respect." Poirot's gaze settled on Lady Beatrice. "And you, madame, displayed fortitude that honoured both your family's legacy and your faith in justice. The locket, emblematic of your heritage, is once again Security's inscription whole, its meaning preserved." The room remained silent, each guest reflecting on their own journey through suspicion, revelation, and absolution. Poirot tapped his cane lightly against the floor. Finally, a remark as ever, delivered with the humility of the detective. "Who knows his work is never done? The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. Tonight we observed them all." A soft murmur of recognition spread. Hastings grinned. "Quite right, mon ami. A few polished clues, and most would have missed the whole pattern." Poirot nodded indulgently. "Exactement. And so, let this affair be a testament that the smallest detail, a smear of ink, a sliver of silver may guide us through the darkest shadows toward the brightest truth." He lowered his cane, offering a final, gracious bow. "Merci, Mies, Amos, for your cooperation and your trust. May your hearts, like your eyes, remain ever vigilant, and may you carry forward the lesson that justice, though challenged, can never be fully suppressed." Lady Beatrice stepped forward, extending her hand. "Monsieur Poirot, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. Your brilliance has restored more than a precious heirloom. You have restored our faith in the triumph of truth. Poirot bowed once more, pressing a gloved hand to his heart. It has been my honor, madame. He turned to Hastings. And now, mon ami, might we finally enjoy that unpoisoned cup of tea? Hastings laughed as he produced a silver tray with porcelain cups, handed by Monsieur Dupont, who dutifully wore fresh gloves free of any smudge. With pleasure, Hastings replied, pouring the steaming tea as the guests gathered in small clusters, sharing gentle conversation and soothing refreshments. The grand hall felt both larger and more intimate, its grandeur matched only by the profound humanity on display. Above them, the chandeliers glimmered in silent applause, and the velvet cushion lay empty, its mission fulfilled. And in the quiet corner of the room, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, for he knew that, though one mystery had closed, here tonight countless others awaited his little grey cells. But for now, justice had been served, friendships renewed, and the truth ever resilient stood victorious in the shadows of Prestwick Manor.